Good evening, everyone. Could you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please remain standing for a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Roll call?
Mayor Dickey?
Here.
Vice Mayor Spellich?
Present.
Councilmember McMahon? Present. Councilmember Friedel?
Here.
Councilmember Charno?
Here.
Councilmember Magazine?
Here.
Councilmember Grzybowski?
Here. Thank you. We start off, as usual, with our reports from the town manager, council, and the mayor. Grady?
Mayor, tonight I have no report.
Oh, okay. What's everybody been up to for 2 weeks? Anything?
I did read an interesting article in our Times, written by Ryan Winslet, the Times editor. And in that article, this was on January 6th, it was just after our last meeting. In this article, I don't know if anybody else read this, but it was interesting to me because it said that the local businesses have had a difficult year for 2020. And it talks about how the businesses had to shift and adapt and then bring in all kinds of safety protocols and that kind of thing. So I guess my point to this is that maybe we as a council also have to do some shifting and adapting to ensure that we have businesses left in this town as well. A lot of our businesses are suffering. I think we're kind of at a crossroads, so it was good to hear that the fair is going to be in April. But we also have to remember that we have to find ways to support our local businesses because a lot of our winter residents will be gone by April too. So again, the business community is suffering. So decisions that we make going forward, I think it's vital that we keep that in mind and find ways to help our local community, our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm sorry, Vice Mayor?
Thank you.
I gave him the sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just note that January 9th was National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. So I want to thank Captain Kratzer and all of his men and women of MCSO for the job that they do protecting us. Also wanted to keep in mind that 315 officers lost their life in 2020. So if we could think of them also. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
I attended a few meetings virtually during the course of the past 2 weeks. The National League of Cities had a virtual vaccine town hall the other day, which was very informative, talking about how we need to work with our public health systems, which of course for us, that would be Maricopa County as well as the state. I watched the governor's State of the State. And this morning, I'm not a morning person, but I signed up for the 7:30 a.m. Phoenix East Valley Critical Infrastructure and Transportation Committee. And that was super interesting. We got to hear from Valley Metro and Waymo people. Then also I did the Arizona League of Cities and Towns call today regarding the legislative update. And the other day I got to listen to the Fountain Hills first official Biolific Cities Committee meeting. They've got a lot of exciting things that they're working on to help make sure we keep the greenery and work to get more greenery kind of stuff. Then the other day, my husband got his second vaccine. So I made it a point to go because he's been volunteering at one of the sites and bragging about how organized it was. So I got to go and see firsthand, you don't get a free shot just for showing up. That I can tell you, but it was very cool and very well organized. I know the online system kind of stinks right now, but when you get there, it's very well done.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Sharon, you deserve your $400 this month.
Thank you so much, and thanks for listening in on that meeting this morning, the legislative meeting. So from now on, we'll have one more agenda item, which will cover whatever's going on with the legislature. You heard about the budget and the governor's budget and how that would affect cities. So we'll talk more about that. I did have our East Valley Mayors meeting on Zoom. Paradise Valley, Chandler, Queen Creek, Cave Creek, Mesa, we're there. Usually we have Tempe and some others, but next time. Talked about short-term rentals, party houses basically, transportation issues, of course, and the impacts that COVID's been having on their cities, like what you were saying, Jerry. Their state of the city and town addresses are going to be different like ours. You know, some are just going to be video, some are going to be postponed or virtual hybrid. That's what ours is going to be. So on the 26th, we're going to have at 8 a.m. I'll be here, but, you know, it's not going to be live, but it'll be a really neat. I'm just looking so forward to the video. Dragged our staff into it again, so I'm really thinking it'll be wonderful to watch. The cities and towns, I talked to the mayors that also, including Fountain Hills, we've been reaching out to the county, and the state about getting vaccines here in town. Obviously, every mayor in the state is trying to do that, and I know that when this first started, Maricopa County had the plan set out, and that is literally what they're doing right now. But I am fairly sure that we'll have the pharmacies in there pretty soon, your own doctors, setting up different areas. But I don't know when right now, but you just have to know that we're committed. Our fire department is committed, our chief, our manager, he meets with the managers. I know that the mayor of Mesa and others have been really working on this, so we're doing our best to get it, because the East Valley did get kind of, we didn't really have a pod very close to us, but now they did open up the one over by the zoo, which really is a lot closer. And if you really have any questions, please go to azdhs.gov or maricopa.gov or call 211, because they're really in charge at this time, so that's kind of the best way to go, and we will definitely let you know as soon as we have anything that we have been able to break through and get done. Really appreciate it. On the youth side, our mayor's youth council met, and they're discussing their community projects, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they came up with. It's just a great group of kids, and again, that was on Zoom. The International Dark Sky Discovery Center launched their capital fundraising campaign. They're working very closely with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council that Sharon's on the board for us, and they're engaging businesses from there, but businesses everywhere, education, ASU, government, and community leaders, and as we know, it'll be located right here in our Civic Plaza. And just take a look at the video that they made. That would be, it's very informative and pretty exciting. And last, I was honored to administer the oath of office for our school board members that took office, Jill Reed and Dana Saar. I just said to Dana it was kind of a kick because he and I were on the school board in 1996, so it was kind of a fun thing. And we thank them and all of the board members for their service to the community and to the children of our Fountain Hills. That is that. We can move on now to our, I'm sorry, Councilman?
A couple of comments. The kickoff for the fundraising, as the mayor mentioned, just started a few days ago, and we're trying to raise $18 million. And if any of you want your name on the building, 8 or 10 million would probably be acceptable to get your name on the building. So just you know, you have my email address. Just let me know. The second thing I wanted to say was that my wife knows a fellow who works for Pfizer, and he says we'll have vaccines at CVS and Walmart within 2 to 3 weeks. I hope he knows what he's talking about. I think he does. And let me also say that I'm seeing there are problems in other parts of the state, but I think for most of us in this area, and it's going pretty smoothly. I don't know what's going on in the more rural areas. I can't speak to that. But from everything I hear and read, it's going quite well.
Thank you. Any other comments? We'll move on to the consent agenda, as always, if anybody would like to remove something. Otherwise, could I get a motion?
So moved.
A move and a second. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Regular agenda item is, our regular agenda is kind of short because we're going to be delving into the sign ordinance discussion. We have Rachel here to talk about a shade structure at Four Peaks Park. Hi.
Thank you, Mayor. This will be the shortest item of the night. I can almost virtually guarantee it. But I just have a couple of quick photos just to kind of give everyone a visual of what we're talking about. So Four Peaks Park is our ongoing capital improvement project. We have the funding and set aside to add a shade structure this year. So if you've been out to the park recently, you've probably seen the new playground. These are some photos from an event that we had when we installed it last December. It's a great park. It has a lot of new features. It is very, very well used. However, one of the things it does lack is shade. And being that we are a desert community, shade is of the utmost importance. It extends not only the life of the structures, so that we get the longest durability of those structures there, but it also obviously extends the playability of the space so that kids can be playing on it into the summer months, and also as things begin to cool down in the fall, it just adds a greater degree of usability. So we've researched it. We are able to install a 64 by 102 foot canopy. This kind of gives you a footprint over the area. Essentially, it will cover all of the play structures other than the zip line. It does have a 14-foot clearance, and it creates a 98% UV protection. So you still have to wear your sunscreen, but it certainly helps. And it does meet all codes and inspection requirements, including wind speeds of up to 125 miles an hour. So we'd like to move forward with this project with this year's CIP funding.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
Rachel, how long will it last? Is there like a promise or contract that's going to guarantee it for a certain number of years?
I wish it was that easy. It's a big one. This is actually probably one of the largest shade structures we will have in our inventory. It is a way, when we designed the space, we wanted to design it so that we could get as much coverage as possible without multiple sales. That being said, generally these last anywhere from 8 to 10 years. Again, that's very subject to monsoons and other damage. Generally speaking, we are trying to install this one so it does minimize any type of vandalism, accessibility, and things like that. That can happen as well. But the biggest expense really is the infrastructure. So if we do have to replace the sail component, that is much less than the actual installation of the piers and all of that.
Okay, and also, this is already budgeted, right? It's already in the budget?
It is. It's already allocated in our CIP funding. So we do have the funding for it. We have the contract for it. It's because it's such a large singular purchase, we felt like it was the right thing to do to bring it before council tonight so that there was some transparency.
Thank you.
Mayor, council, if I may too, Rachel brought up a really good point, and that is council had authorized this contract and we still had plenty of money on it. But we felt that since this was a part of the capital improvement project and program that you had approved for this, we thought it was important to close the loop and come back to you guys on this.
Thank you. Councilman?
Yeah, in a previous residence, we had an awning. It was a little smaller than this one. And we found that the sun really bleached it out and created problems. Do they put any kind of a coating or anything on it to try to reflect the sun or preserve it?
We do work with them to use UV protectant coating and things like that. The vendor that we are going with actually does have has worked with us in the past. If you've been recently down to Fountain Park where we have the musical instruments as well as the playground down there, the yellow and blue shade structures that we use there are provided by the same vendor. We've had a lot of success in terms of keeping the colors vibrant and keeping them as durable as possible. Ultimately, the sun does take its toll, there's no doubt, but we have found that this has been the best bet for us.
How old are they? Roughly.
That's a real test. I do know figure that the
4 or 5
musical
years old,
instrument,
isn't it?
the musical instrument park's been there about 5 years. So to give you a rough estimate.
And you said they do sort of an, not ultraviolet, what do you call it? They put something on it.
Yes, yeah.
It's actually in the weave. So it's like when you buy patio furniture, it says Sunbrella, or your patio umbrella. It's Sunbrella. So it's a particular synthetic material that's actually in the weave that actually has the synthetic material that keeps it fade resistant and able to hold up better to the elements.
So I take it we can't come back and do something in 4 or 5 years to improve it. 121,000 for 8 years, a lot of money.
It is. This is a big shade structure. There's no doubt about it. Again, ideally, once the structure's installed, the piers, the post, everything, that's the bulk of the investment. The shade piece is relatively low comparatively.
So this is about 6,500 square feet. And so if you think about it, it's really, while the shade canopy itself is very expensive, it's all the structural elements that are tying and holding it down. The pylons and all that have to meet the wind resistance. So that's where a lot of the money is going into, is the structural element to install and put this in place.
One last question. Wind can obviously be a huge problem. Do they test them for wind resistance and how long it might last, how much wind pressure it would take to be a problem?
They do. It is rated for up to 125 mile an hour. That is the highest rating that we have seen, and that we do require that. All of our shade structures are designed to meet that. So not just this playground, but all of the different ones, whether they're over our ramadas or other things
That's
like
great.
that.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I drove by later this afternoon just to kind of see it again, and it's always fun to see kids out there playing and people walking their dogs and stuff in that area. And a little bit off subject, how's the basketball court doing? Is it being used pretty much?
It is. It has been a unexpectedly popular amenity. I mean, we knew that basketball court would go well and it would suit the park, and however, the usability and the usage of it has been, dare I say, almost daily. We get reports, we get thank yous, we get questions about how can we start a league, or how can we bring adult leagues into town, or how can we start expanding our opportunities with our basketball because of it. So it's gotten great feedback.
That's good to hear. And it's exciting to just see more improvements in that park and that neighborhood. So, did you have something, Mayor? Or otherwise, I was going to move approval.
I
But
was just going to ask if we had any speaker cards. No? Okay.
with that, I'll move to approve the motion as written.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So our next item is to discuss and provide feedback regarding our draft sign ordinance. And I don't know, Grady, do you want to intro?
Yes, I'll do a few words here. So Mayor and Council, before you is a proposed sign ordinance that has a lot of elements tied to it. You'll get into talking about things like temporary signs and other aspects that have been kind of much talked about issues in our community. Also about the Reed versus Town of Gilbert Supreme Court case that really is helping us with this. We're trying to get this to be more in compliance with that Supreme Court case. So this has already gone through the review process with Planning and Zoning. This was back in, I believe, in May or June of last year. This is going to give your opportunity tonight to weigh in, ask your questions. We're going to treat this and the next item after this as if this were a work session. So that this is perfectly normal. Feel free to ask all the questions you want to. If you haven't really fully reviewed all the materials, don't feel like you had to do that, because it is very complex and it's easier to almost absorb it in this kind of format to learn from it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the Development Services Director, John Wesley, who has more to say and give you a full report on this item.
Mr. Miller, thank you. Mayor and Council, good evening. As Mr. Miller was saying, work session. We don't expect action tonight. What we're looking for is a lot of discussion, feedback, concepts, ideas, so that if there are modifications that you feel are needed, we can go back and study those, and depending upon the degree of them, go back through P&Z or come back here with those modifications. I'll bring up some things as we go, where I've still had questions if it's, taking the right approach, if it's what the council wants. So definitely feel free. We also had intended to earlier get you a notebook with all the materials that you got electronically and hard copy. Because of the partial shutdown and not being in the office as much, we didn't get those done until today. So you have them there at your desk this evening, a notebook that has the memo, the existing ordinance, the draft ordinance, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. So if those are easier to refer to, or you have that to take away also to continue to look at as we deal with this interesting and fun topic. So, overview here of what we're going to discuss tonight. First, I'll review a little bit about the background and goals that we had in doing this. I'm going to do an overview of the draft ordinance, just kind of a high level, kind of what each chapter is about, each section is about, just to put it all in that context before we really delve into the weeds, which will be the third part of the presentation, where we really get into some of those details. I thought it was helpful, again, because it's a big document, a lot of parts and ideas to make sure you have that overall concept in mind of what the pieces are. So, background and goals. As Mr. Miller mentioned, one of the key drivers to this was a Supreme Court decision from back in 2015, Reed versus the town of Gilbert. It is the town of Gilbert to our south. And they had an issue with some A-frame signs in their community and the way they were developing regulations based on the content of the message on the sign. And that went, again, all the way to the Supreme Court. They determined that that was not appropriate. And so towns and cities all across the country have been revamping their sign codes to get rid of any regulations that were content-based. So again, that's been the main driver to what we are doing with this update. But while we're doing that, we're looking at a few other things along the way. We have reviewed the current code internally with our staff, as they have experience working with the current code. I've reviewed other codes throughout the valley, as they have already done their update process to see how they addressed some of the issues. We had a small stakeholders group get together early in the process, provide us with a little bit of feedback of some of the issues that they saw and things we might do better with our sign ordinance. So with those things in mind, we move forward to remove the content-based items to improve the overall readability of the code. As someone who's come in the last couple of years, fresh and new, to look at this code with experience with other codes, I've found the current code a little bit challenging sometimes to follow. I think if you drafted it, you understood the nuances, but it's been a little bit of a challenge for us that are new, so we've worked to improve that readability. There's some issues that we've noted along the way that we felt were appropriate to go ahead and address at this time. But for the most part, in terms of the actual requirements, area, size, number, that type of thing of signs, in the absence of any direction to change them, we have tried to leave them as consistent as we can with the current code, pending any direction we might get from council to make any changes. So that was the philosophy approach we took, try to be as consistent with those types of things as we could. So with that in mind, again, just a quick run through the overall ordinance. Introductory section 601, introduction of code. We changed the name on this, provide a little bit of extra background material to help shore up the legal aspects of this, but otherwise, again, mostly unchanged. Currently, section 602 of the ordinance, if you look at it, is reserved. There's nothing there. We use this opportunity to use that section. The last time the sign code was updated, a decision was made to take all the definitions dealing with signs and put them in the definition section for the overall zoning ordinance. That's an appropriate way to do things, keep all definitions together. However, it's my opinion, and I believe Aaron agrees, that when somebody's wanting to do signs, they're looking at signs that really care about the rest of the zoning ordinance, so we might as well give them the information they need right where they're looking. So we bring all those definitions back into this chapter of the ordinance.
Mayor,
Yes, Council?
I have a question. He's a lot more than 6 feet away, and I'm having a little trouble with the muffled sound. Is it possible to take the mask off while he presents?
No, I don't think so.
Why?
Because there's a mask mandate that says we wear masks, especially inside like this, and we're going to be all talking for quite a few.
So I will try to slow down a little bit too. That may help. I know I get busy talking. I tend to talk fast. I'll try to slow it down, and hopefully that'll help, council member. Okay. So section 602 is definitions. So that was a change by adding that, and we added some pictures and updated those. Section 603 currently is sign permits. We changed it to building permits because that's really what they are. Otherwise, kept it largely unchanged, but did add a section F that tells us what should be submitted with an application for a permit, so we get consistency in the information that we look at. Section 604 is violation and penalties. In the current code, that's two sections, 604 and 605. They're closely related, so we decided let's put them all in one section because that will help us out here in a little bit. So what was section 606 about enforcement and remedies, we moved to section 605 with no significant changes. So now section 606 was not being used. So we took the opportunity there to create a new section called sign plans. Under the current code, you can apply for comprehensive sign plans and master sign plans, but the rules for those are buried in parts of section 608. We felt it would make them more useful and apparent if they were stood out in their own section. So we've moved those here, and we'll talk about some of the modifications we made, again, hopefully make those approaches more useful. We talk about that section. Section 607 provides general regulations and guidance about signs, things about how to measure signs, where they're prohibited, where they're allowed, and some of those general things. So this section also remains largely unchanged in terms of content, but we reorganized it and put in some subheadings, so hopefully it's easier to follow and find the pieces of information that you're looking for. And then we did add a new section at the end about design guidelines that we'll talk about in some more detail in a minute. And then section 608, this is the main chapter or section of the current code dealing with actual requirements for various types of signs. So that remains so in this ordinance, with section A providing the rules for individual sign types. We did take the step in this section to try to organize the information on each sign type so it's consistent, again, to make it improve that readability and consistency in how the code works. And then also in 608, we talk about electronic message centers, temporary sign allowances, which will be a very important section for us to talk about in a little while, and subsection D on residential directional signs. So that's the quick overview of what's in the code. Unless somebody has any questions right now, we'll start digging deep and get into the individual sections of the code and what's in them. So going back to section.
I have a
Yes.
question.
Councilwoman, and if you have questions along the way, I think we can go
Oh,
ahead
yes,
and do that
please.
too. Yes. Thank you, Councilwoman.
As far as the definitions for the the directional sign, the definition is very narrow, but when you say that it's only allowed near a driveway or adjacent to a driveway, is that on purpose? Or is it like a specific sign you're referring to that would only be near a driveway?
So you're talking about the residential directional signs in 608 C? D,
Yeah.
608D. Yes, so because those are typically used for garage sales, open houses, estate sales, those types of things, and would be along a roadway. We're telling you how close they can be to the road. You can set them further away if you want, but we're telling them you can't get any closer than a certain distance. And because they're typically small signs, they typically do need to be close to the road so they can be seen. And so that's why we put that.
But there's one that's permanent, and the on-site directional is a small permanent sign.
Oh, okay, that's, all right, that's right, that's a different
And
sign
there's
type.
other section for temporary ones,
Right.
like garage sales and
Right,
stuff
right,
like
right,
that.
uh-huh.
So the one that is for permanent
Right.
is specifically just for those
Correct.
permanent signs, like going in an
Correct.
apartment or whatever the
Correct,
case
so
may
an
be?
enter, exit sign, those types of things. We needed to account for those.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the way to account for those. We can't call it an entry sign because we can't control the context, the wording. It can't be just an enter sign. So on-site directional was the sign name, sign type we gave it, but that's its purpose. So that's why it has locational requirements that are consistent with being along a driveway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Okay, so 601, introduction to the code. We added a more lengthy section A here about findings and purpose. Again, this helps set up some of the legal framework for the ordinance itself, what it is we're trying to accomplish, what its purpose is. We're trying to balance the needs of businesses with the safety needs along the streets and some of those ideas. In this section, we also talk about what this ordinance applies to and what it doesn't apply to, so what the applicability. And so we try to make it clear here that it is related to the issues of size, number, location of signs. It's not about the content of the signs. And also talk about what's not subject to this ordinance. So again, this is one of the important concepts here, is signs authorized by state statutes are not subject to this particular ordinance. So you might think of a particular sign type that falls in that category, political signs. State statutes have come in and set down the rules for those. And today we have rules in our code about political signs, and they differ from those of the state, and so that always leads us to conflict. And so by just saying if it's authorized by the state, it's not part of our code, we don't have those conflicts.
That's going to be part of our discussion because when you think about it, then that's content-based. And so one of the things that I think every city is probably struggling with is if we follow the state statute, then we are creating rules that are content-based. So it's not clear, you know what I'm saying? So we're not going to get a clear legal answer to this, but it's something to keep in mind for when we talk about it, that what do you think about the fact that part of our ordinance will be discussing political signs when that is content-based?
I think
Councilwoman?
that you can't help it. I mean, signs are signs. They're a form of speech. And even though you do your best to avoid making them content-based, you still have to regulate them. And so therefore, by regulating them, there's a fine line. In some respect, you are doing, you know, what content-based is, but to the best of everybody's ability, you're not. I mean, you're saying you're not. But so I just think it would be really, really difficult to have an ordinance that doesn't in some way, slightly or inadvertently, affect content.
Okay, Councilman?
No, I guess my issue with that is I guess I don't understand how a state legislature can overrule a Supreme Court ruling. And I know that comes down to a legal issue, I guess, but that's the part I don't understand, so.
And part of that, I was discussing this earlier, and we just want to make sure, too, that we know we're just discussing these things and we're not trying to make legal decisions. But along those lines, though, then if you just say, okay, we have a state statute telling us how to regulate political signs, one of the things that we could possibly look at is then treating every sign like a political sign. So whatever rules they're telling us we have to follow, then how do we make it not content-based? We make every single sign fall under that same thing? Or do we, as a city or a town, say, wait a minute, that just doesn't work. We can't follow the state statute and follow the Supreme Court. And then do we take that into a whole different realm? So those are, you know, it's big questions and things for us to think about.
That's what makes this so much fun and so easy. So thank you, Mayor. So the rest of Section 601, again, deals with a few other sections, kind of some of the legal framework things we need. Most restrictive provision applies, controlling document, effect on previous signs, appeal and severability, again, some of those things that lawyers like to see in here to keep us legal in what we do. So 602 is a new sign definition chapter. Yes.
Comment on 601. When I say this, I'm going to want Captain Kreitzer to protect me when I go home. I'm looking at AF. It says, promotes the aesthetic and environmental values of the community, providing for signs that do not impair dark skies, property values, community appearance, or attractiveness of the town as a place to visit, live, work, and shop. In my opinion, the signs look trashy. We say we're one of the most beautiful towns in America, and I think these things look awful. And I've thought about what, if anything, we could do about it. I know we can ban all signs, which is not feasible. And I know that what I'm going to suggest can't be done now, given the condition of our businesses and so on. But I find myself wondering if we couldn't allow signs, and I'm talking about A-frame and feather in particular, if we couldn't only allow signs on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which would allow religious institutions, shops, and so on, to have their signs out so the public could see it. It's not something I'm proposing. It's just something that occurred to me because I've really been concerned and frankly upset at the proliferation of these A-frame signs in particular. They're everywhere. And I don't see how we can say that that they don't affect the attractiveness of the town as a place to visit, live, work, and shop. And I'm not asking for a response, just a comment.
Mayor, if it's okay, I'm going to give a little bit of a response in terms of some of the things we're going to talk about as we move forward. And starting with this chapter on definitions, they start to lay the framework for some of the things that you're talking about. Also, when we get to 606 and talk about the sign plans, we'll see that some of this applies more to the permanent signs than it does the temporary signs, but using that as an opportunity, excuse me, to give more in terms of size, area, whatever, for more creative, more attractive signs. And then when we get to the end of 607, there's a section that's been added in terms of some design guidelines for both permanent and temporary signs. Again, I took trying to be as consistent as I can with what we have currently in the code. Those are fairly minimal. Maybe the council wants to look at some adjustments on those. So I think we have some areas where we can at least discuss some of those concepts that you're talking about as we go along with this.
I just wanted to take a moment and remind everyone that pretty is in the eye of the beholder. So the business owner is going to think it's beautiful and we think it's not, or it doesn't matter. Part of the problem is subjectivity is written into it. And that's kind of really all I wanted to do was point it out, is one man's treasure is another man's junk.
Thank you. Councilman?
Just a quick comment. I certainly agree with that, but we make judgments all the time in this town. We have to make these judgments, and I think we have to consider alternatives. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Okay. Section 602 of the ordinance, again, gives us the definitions of the different sign types and items that we need with related to signs. This has been changed quite a bit from the current code. We have, with a different approach, it's not content-based. We had to define some things differently and define some types that weren't there. There's some things used before that we didn't need anymore. We've also added pictures so that it's easier to be sure we're communicated when we talk about a sign type, what it is, what it consists of. I've shown a couple here on the screen, examples from that chapter, but starting where Councilmember Magazine was just a moment ago, as an example, when you look at the section on A-frame design, A-frame signs, and the definition, a self-supporting, temporary, lightweight, portable sign made of durable, non-pliant material such as wood, sheet metal, plastic, other lightweight, rigid material designed to rest atop the ground. That's a good kind of fairly standard kind of definition. If the council wanted to do something to narrow that, strengthen it a little bit, that's one place in terms of that definition where, maybe we don't allow them to be plastic, for example, to make them more attractive or whatever. So again, as you look at, and you have the chance to keep looking at these definitions, you can have that kind of thing in mind to see if there are any definitions that you feel like we ought to modify, again, to strengthen in some way, allow something maybe we haven't allowed. But we go through each of the sign types and show those. Another key definition in here is a definition of sign itself, because this ordinance only applies to what we define as a sign. And so the second underlined part of this is an addition to what's in the code today by saying when the display device is visible beyond the boundaries of the public or private property on which the sign is displayed. So if you've got a sign tucked around back, it's for internal use. It's not something we're going to regulate through this code. Or you got a little open sign on your front door that you can't see from the street. We're not trying to regulate that. We're regulating those things you can see from the street that are trying to get your attention and get you to come onto the property.
I'm sorry, if I could, I want to go back to 601 because I missed something that
Okay.
I had marked. It says you need the written consent of the property owner, the property owner's agent, or an authorized representative. Does this apply to shopping centers as well?
Yes.
So any of the shops in the shopping center have got to get permission from one of these three categories?
From the owner. We assume they have it typically through their lease. We would typically assume that through their lease they've got consent of the property owner for those signs that go on an individual property. A lot of times they do have a comprehensive sign plan that's pre-authorized, those signs. So we always check those also.
And what about the location of those signs in a shopping center where you have a row of shops?
Typically through the design process, they've designated an area as a sign ban or sign placement area, which usually works. Sometimes it doesn't.
I hope we can enforce that in the future, because I see a lot of situations where people put up signs and feathers and so on, aren't anywhere near the shop. They can be 100, 200 feet away to try to attract the traffic. So I would hope we could enforce that.
Yes, Councilmember Magazine, I was thinking more of the attached signs on the building, and certainly the detached banner or temporary signs, that is another issue that I think we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about a little bit later, because there are a lot of nuances on that particular piece. So anyway, that's how we are defining signs, very similar to today, but with that main nuance of, if you can't see it from the street, if it's too small, in a backyard or whatever, it's not subject to this code. And then also providing definitions for permanent and temporary signs, because that's very important as we go through the code and where some of the regulations apply or don't apply, as which of those two types of sign they are. So as you look at each definition, each sign type, just about everyone will say it's either temporary or permanent sign. There are a few that don't, such as a flag. The flag pole is probably pretty permanent. The flag itself goes up and down. So, and a window sign, depending on what type it is one just hand painted on or one that's etched in the glass. Is maybe temporary, maybe permanent. So a couple we couldn't really quite distinguish that way, but most of them we do because it's, again, important for later regulation. So that takes us to section 6.03, currently called sign permits. It's just a little nuanced change calling it a building permit, because that's really what you get. It's a building permit for a sign as opposed to a building permit for a building or a hot water heater or whatever. It's a building permit. And so there are no real changes there, except in section F of that, we did add a provision in here describing what it is we need to see submitted on a sign permit application or building permit application for a sign. Right now, we don't have any direction for that, so we can get a wide variety of things, which can slow down the review process, because sometimes we get the information we need and sometimes we don't. Now we're laying it out. Give us these things at a minimum, and we should be able to review your sign.
Yeah, I'm looking at the photographs in 604, is it?
602?
602. I'm sorry, going back. Do these photographs mean that people can have signs like those tall ones that you're showing in the photographs? And
The feather banner?
and the feather
signs?
ones and so on?
Yeah, on page 7 of 32, what I
Yeah,
call feather banners?
7, yes.
No. When we get back to 607, you'll see those are specifically prohibited. But so when you see that specific prohibition, to know what we're prohibiting, you can come back here and see this is what we're prohibiting.
I read a lot of it, but not all of it.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. And a lot of different pieces. And I keep going back and forth myself and trying to remember, okay, what was it we said about this piece? Okay. So in 604, violations and penalties, again, that's a combination of what was 604 and 605. It's all the same, except we're proposing to increase the fines associated with violations of this section. Anybody think we shouldn't or think they should be higher, or that's good? So 605, again, it's currently a 606 in the code. If you're doing that comparison, it's the same as the current code, except because of our discussions about civil penalties that we've been having, we added that provision in here also, that we can use that option as we're doing enforcement.
Excuse me, I'm going to back up, and I have a question about violations, about the enforcement. I wanted to know, how come you wait 12 months for the fine not to exceed 12 months? Because that seems like a really, really long time to have a sign sit in nonconformance with the code.
No.
The purpose of the code, in my opinion, is to regulate that and
Sure.
have them conform. So if it's nonconformance, they get a whole grace period of a year to fix it?
Mayor, Councilmember, no. What that's saying is, if you've been fined once, if you get fined a second time within that year, it's $100 instead of $50. It's not
Okay.
giving you a grace period. If it's more than a year, you're back to $50. But if it's been less than a year, it's going to be 100. And if it's,
So how long, maybe I'm in the wrong section, but how long do they have to be in compliance once they have notice of noncompliance?
That's a matter of code compliance, works with individual property owners in their situation. We always try to work them through as quickly as possible. We don't have a specific set time frame. Technically, every day a violation exists could be a new offense, so it's in their interest to correct it. But it's a matter of working proactively with individuals for how quickly it gets addressed.
Okay.
John, do you think it would motivate businesses if you had more of a time frame in there as far as correcting the issue or issuing the citation?
Mayor, council member, it might. Most of our sign violations are with the temporary signs. And with those, it's very easy to, in fact, a lot of the times when it's the yard sale or the open house signs, the code officer will just pick them up and take them to him and say, you had that in the wrong spot. And so the violation's cured right away. Other temporary banner signs, whatever, they're easy just to take down. It's harder when it's a permanent sign, and that's where if one happens to have gotten up or is not being maintained properly, working with them on the best approach. It's generally worked well, but again, we're open to considering other alternatives if the council would like.
So when that was put together, you were thinking more of permanent signs that weren't in conformance?
Right, for these,
okay.
yes. It's, again, the temporary signs are usually remedied pretty quickly. So this brings us to 606 on sign plans. So again, currently in the ordinance in 608, J7 and 608Z, there are provisions in 608 J7, it's master sign plans. So when you've got a shopping center with multiple tenants and so forth, multiple owners of adjacent parcels, they can get together and decide to do a master sign plan, and that gives them some slight allowances on how the code's applied, but they have to get together and agree to that plan. 608 is a comp sign plan, which is more of an individual business, is seeking some upfront approval of what their signs would be on their building when they have a multiple tenant building. So when individuals come in for their signs, you can just compare it against that process. It's worked reasonably well, but it's not everything that we think it could be in terms of how other towns and cities have used similar provisions. And as we talked to the Arizona Sign Association and got some suggestions from them. So we've taken those two sections we currently have and brought it into this one section and called it a sign plan. And so it's to address unique situations and to encourage more creative sign design, purposes behind it. Subsection B gives application requirements, but subsection C really lays out what we're after in terms of the review price criteria and what you can accomplish. So somebody would apply for one of these sign plans. So we do get that up front when a development's going in, what their total sign package is supposed to look like, wall signs and freestanding signs and so forth. We'll allow some increase in the number, height, area of signs. So that's their incentive to go through this process up front. Gives us a chance to look at their design and up front. And then as a bonus to that, if they will meet some more higher criteria for the design, we'll give them even a little bit more bonus in terms of sign area. So again, those are their incentives to try to go through this process. And again, back to Councilmember Magazine, some of your thoughts about the attractiveness of signs. We've taken this first approach to this to try to encourage more creative and attractive design. We can go back and study this and maybe come back with something a little bit more. Maybe gives you more incentives for higher level of design criteria. But also remember, signs are going to change slowly over time before people really need to come in and change a sign and do things. But
I know this comment isn't going to go anywhere. I think I raised it once before. Have you considered at all having a variety of colors that are acceptable? It would seem to me that if we did, it might make them more attractive if there were more uniformity. They don't have to be the same, but they don't need to be outlandish either.
so, Mayor and Councilmember, I think we start to run into some challenges fairly quickly with that. It's something we can go back and consider. But when we've got corporate colors to try to dictate something different becomes a challenge. That's kind of one of the big things up front. Otherwise, again, you're getting somewhat back to content. You're having to look at the sign to see if it's met a certain color palette. So again, I think there's some challenges, but we're, again, willing to look at options and opportunities that the council would like us to.
I'm sorry. I understand the problem, and I understand the corporate situation. But even McDonald's has given leeway in a lot of towns to totally different designs and colors. And so it can be done. Maybe it's just too difficult in these circumstances.
John, this is only for permanent signs, right? The sign plan?
Yes.
You don't do
Yes.
that with, okay, because we had talked a little bit about temporary signs, having them have some sort of uniformity. I know there are some communities where, like, you just can't put a for sale sign on your house. It has to look
Right,
like a
right,
little
right.
log cabin or something.
Right.
So, but this is strictly talking about permanent signs.
Yes, Mayor, it is at this point. Now, that's an idea. Maybe it is possible to wrap the temporary signs into that package. I hadn't thought about it before. I'm not sure if anybody would want to go that route because you get an individual tenant in your business and they have certain needs and whatever. It may be a challenge to do that. But to, again, it's something we could think about if you would like for us to take a closer look at that as an option.
I have a question. When you are reviewing the sign for the design, and do you always, when you're looking at it, given this ordinance, do you take into consideration the 10% increase? So that, what I'm saying is, would it be, make it too big for where it is? In any, like, taking into consideration the aesthetics, the property, the signs it is, et cetera, will that 10% ever make the sign like too big for where it's supposed to be in contrary to the regulations here? Or I'm not making myself clear.
Yeah, no, I think I've got your question, Councilmember. Boy, would it ever. I suppose there's that possibility. The amount of change that we are allowing, 10%, isn't that much. A 50 square foot sign will now be 55 square foot sign. So it's, again, it's not a whole lot of change. There are very few criteria that limit kind of that placement and area coverage. I know on the wall-mounted sign, it's a 2-foot border minimum around the side, so we still couldn't violate that standard if that's what they were doing. So I think some of those would keep it from being too big in that regard. We wouldn't let it go above a roof line, or some of those things would still apply and have to be able to fit within those criteria.
Okay. I was just like concerned that somebody else might have a same and similar sign, and who knows? I don't know, 10% is 10%, but they might say, well, that person has a bigger sign than I did, blah, blah, blah. Why didn't I get that same accommodation? But that was my concern about it.
Okay, other questions, comments about the sign plan and that option? Okay. 607 is a fairly long section, again, largely unchanged, mostly adjusted kind of location, grouping things together. You previously, we brought a piece of this to you a couple of months ago because we wanted to go ahead and get it in place because we had some people that needed it in terms of the sign measurement, where we took the change from 1 square foot to 1.5 square feet. That was part of the 607, and so that's already in here since the council's already approved it. The piece of this code talks about where prohibited sign locations. Currently, the code says we cannot have any temporary signs on Shea Boulevard. The challenge we've had with that over the years is a real estate sign. That's a temporary sign. We've needed to allow those along there as businesses are trying to market properties. And so we've taken the approach where they're not really temporary signs because they're there so much, I guess, but they are. So we try to clarify this by saying, well, we'll talk about a little bit later in sort of sign types. Post and board signs, even though they're temporary sign, they are allowed, but all other temporary signs are not allowed. So that gets us out of that little bit of a conundrum that we've had. But other temporary signs are not allowed on Shea Boulevard.
Councilman?
How would we handle political signs on Shea, where you see some that are, certain size and some are huge, and how do we deal with that?
So that's, Councilmember, that's mostly a state statute. And there, and I don't know if you remember, I think it's 16 square feet in residential and 32 in commercial. I believe that's the correct number.
Sounds right, John.
But whatever they are in state statute, that's what we have been using the last few years.
Okay,
And that
thank
would be the same.
Well, so they had a 4x4 for political signs, but again, here we go. Having any kind of size or placement limitation based on content is what I'm having an issue with. I wanted to bring up, this is a good time because we're talking about location, that in the past, and I can't remember the year, when the legislature said we had to allow political signs in rights of way, which we didn't used to. I mean, when it used to be, you didn't have any political signs in Fountain Hills. So at the time, again, 2009, I don't remember, the state statute was written in a way that allowed for these sign-free zones. Like if you were, Aaron, I can't remember the name, but it's like if you were in a
Commercial tourism zone.
yeah, tourism. So, and it had a maximum mileage that it could be. So at the time, we put together this map, that's what I had given you all with the red, which was basically where we were allowed to still continue to prohibit political signs in Fountain Hills, which was, basically a lot, Palisades, Shea, Fountain Hills Boulevard, all around here, so it kind of addressed some of that, coming to town hall and seeing political signs pretty much against something we were trying to do on town hall, which is an interesting dynamic, but that's for another time. But anyway, this was something that we were able to do that I understand is still the state law. So it's something to keep in mind when we talk about other signs and regulating other signs based on what the state is telling us how we can regulate political signs. I wanted to just quickly point out too that Cave Creek does not allow portable signs. They allow them only with a permit on those kind of roads like that. So right-of-way permit is required for a sign proposed to be placed on Carefree Highway or on Cave Creek Road. Temporary signs cannot be displayed for more than 48 consecutive hours. Paradise Valley says all temporary signs must be removed each day no later than sunset. So here we are, basically, we're down to regulating based on, size, where, when, and that's kind of, and not content. So as we go forward with this, continuing to talk about Shea, I don't particularly think that I would care for having signs that are the post and board, so they're 5 square feet,
6 or
8 square feet if it's like an empty commercial. But so that's small, and you're going 50 miles, I don't know. I would prefer, when you hear about people saying they drive into Fountain Hills, what they think of it, I'd prefer not to have signs on Shea. And so I don't, so this particular change is not something that I'm comfortable with allowing signs on Shea, but, we're all going to talk about it as we go on. Councilman?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. I just, I don't know if this is for John or Aaron, but so in your research, with these changes, John, and looking at other cities and towns, I mean, none of the Phoenixes or Scottsdales or Glendales have looked into the, political sign issue in terms of challenging it, or, that they just go along with it? I mean, no one has brought this up, or just,
Mayor, council member, from what conversations I've had, everybody looks at it and is confused and challenged and recognizes it's a problem on kind of that local level, but I'm not aware of anybody trying to get, force an issue through the courts or the state to get it addressed. Aaron, I don't know if you've heard of any of that. But.
Like John, I've not heard of a specific sort of preemptive legal challenge seeking a declaratory judgment from a court to have it determined whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional. Many different agencies and many different interest groups, including the league, and many of my colleagues in other cities and towns have spent countless hours at conferences and on email listservs trying to figure out what the proper and best way is to implement this. Ultimately, I think where people have come down is it being a matter of, I can't say local preference because it's a state statute, but how much of a direct or hands-off approach do you want to take? Unfortunately, there hasn't been a challenge. There's no immediately clear legal answer as to what the best solution is, notwithstanding our efforts to figure it out.
Does the statute lay out any kind of penalty or like if we would ban them, I mean, what would happen?
That's a good question. I assume, yeah, I mean, my guess is the enforcement agent would be the Attorney General's office, I would have to assume, to try to seek compliance from a city or town to permit these types of political signs. Whether ultimately a city or town could be compelled to do that is a different story, depending on the constitutionality of the statute.
What,
Okay, sir.
what's the worst thing that can happen?
I think I would suppose a court order dictating that you do it, pay somebody's attorney's fees and costs.
Wasn't there a big thing like with plastic bags and weren't we holding out on something else with water or something at one point in time that, I don't know what the consequences were, but we ultimately had to give in, you know, but, yeah, so.
Well, I guess, again, if we treat every sign like a political sign, we say the state's telling us how we have to handle political signs, but we treat every sign that way, then we're following both rules. But then right? If we treat every sign the same, if they're telling us this is how we have to regulate a political sign, which is, it can't go up more than, 90 days, whatever it is, before an election. It has to be allowed, except we have our red lines, and then it has to be taken down at a certain time after the election. If we treated every single sign like that, I'm not even saying we should, but if we did, it seems like we'd be obeying both laws. And I'm not asking you to make a definitive decision on this, but it seems like that way we would be able to obey both laws, and then I don't see any consequence to that except for kind of an odd sign law.
I think there's a significant difference between a political sign and what it's trying to say, and it truly is a temporary sign, usually to elect somebody or otherwise, where any other temporary regular sign has a completely, and this is content-based, meaning. So I can see why they're treated differently than just bunching them all together, because it's not a political sign. I mean,
But the Supreme Court said you're not allowed to regulate differently based on content. That's what I can't get past. Political
well-
signs are based on content.
So, Mayor, to your point, if you go back in the definition section or down into section 6.08, you see what we have a sign type defined as yard sign. A yard sign looks like what a lot of political signs look like. And for that sign type, we give specific regulations for how many you can have in your yard and where they can go and that type of thing. And so if the state were out of this, somebody wanted to do a political sign, that would be their option. And, they could.
Right, and I think most of
but it
us,
would
when
use
we
up their
think
sign
about
allowance.
it, we're, and maybe I'm wrong, but we're more concerned with the right-of-way stuff than what people have in their yards, right?
Some of the garage sale signs, though, look like A-frame signs as
Correct.
well. So we don't want to end up handcuffing any of our businesses either with this. So it's a tough call. But
And we haven't even gotten to that part of the code yet.
Well, then we don't have to talk about it.
But Mayor, I do want to go back to your comment about, 6.07 B to M on the temporary signs on Shea. So that currently says temporary signs within the Shea Road right-of-way are prohibited, except post and board signs. And we did that because we know historically we've gotten the for sale, for rent signs. Look at the Target Center. Those businesses have wanted to, let you know there's a vacancy there. And so that's why we've done that, is because historically it just has seemed important for business. We don't have to do that. We can strike that, and no temporary signs would be allowed along Shea. So we need direction from council if you want us to make that change. Otherwise, going on to Councilmember Magazine's point earlier, on page 20 of 32 of the sign ordinance, prohibited signs. So this is 607E, down number 9. Prohibited signs includes all banners, pennants, streamers, feather signs, balloons, flags, searchlights, strobe lights, beacons, inflatable signs, except as specifically defined.
I'm sorry, you're going too fast for me. Where are we?
You're on page 20 of the new code. It's 607E9.
I can't find it, but just go ahead.
Okay. So this lists those types of signs, including the feather signs. So all these are prohibited except as allowed. And so there are then specific allowances for some banners, some balloons, and some flags. That's the only thing on that list that ever get allowed. Everything else is prohibited.
Obviously, I can't look at it because I can't find it, but,
Yeah.
well, see, I'm not in the binder. I printed it all out. But anyway, banners are allowed when?
So we'll get to that when we get into 608 about specifically when they're allowed.
Okay.
But this, so the inflatable things that, that do this, and the feather signs and so forth, those are prohibited.
Great.
And there's never an allowance for them. Yes,
A question. It says that neon signs,
yes,
are those in the window, or are they?
yes. That's the only place we
permanent?
do allow them by code today, and we kept it the same today. The only place you can have a neon sign is as a type of a window sign, basically an open or closed kind of sign. It's about all it can be. We'll see the details when we get into the window sign section in 608.
Okay, I'll wait.
If there's a desire to allow more neon signs in town, we'd need to come back and modify this. Again, we were trying to stay as compatible as current. So make the note here that we've added a little bit to the illumination section based on some other codes. There's current section 607M regarding vehicle signs that got moved. There's a current section 607N that gives you some additional sign area if you put Town of Fountain Hills on your sign. Now, that's content-based, so we just had to get rid of that one. And then here in G is where we have now put in some very basic design guidelines to try to help, push design maybe a little bit. The primary things have to do with how the raceways are used and how the signs get attached so that they look more integral in part of the building. But in addition to what we had back in the definition, like of an A-frame sign, where it talked about the type of materials you could use, here in G3, temporary signs must be made of durable materials and properly maintained in good repair. So again, here's a place, if that's not quite a strong enough statement for what you want to see about the quality of temporary signs or how they're maintained, this would be a place we could add some more detail if the council felt that was important. Moving on then. So 608, this is the real meat of the sign ordinance, now that we're finally getting here. So this is really the same function as the current 608, but it's been significantly reformatted and worked to remove all the content-based regulations. Again, we established a consistent format for each sign type, so you can easily look through and make those comparisons for how different signs can be used in terms of number, size, location, those types of things. We did make one fairly significant change from the current code. This is one of the few things we felt like we really have a challenge with in the current code. Current code has a section about aggregate sign area. There are certain types of signs then that are listed. wall signs, freestanding signs, canopy signs, a few of those. And in addition to whatever the individual regulations are for that sign type, you can never get beyond a maximum aggregate area of signage for the entire property. And so there's some benefit to that if we want to make sure the amount of sign area stays limited. We've had a lot of challenges trying to apply that, however, partially because of the wording that's in the sections and how they work together, and some lack of clarity sometimes where you're talking about allowance per business, per occupant, per building, per lot, and that makes it a challenge. And then when you are talking about a multi-tenant building, if sign area gets used up with one or two tenants, then you have a third tenant come along, there's no sign area left for that tenant that ought to have some signage. And so, again, in looking at our overall regulations compared to others, I feel like our individual sign allowances are reasonable enough that we really don't need this aggregate piece. Again, it seems to be confusing and challenging. So we have proposed to take it out and have done so at this point in the draft. And then again, otherwise, we've tried to keep the allowances as numbers and size as similar as possible. So again, here's this standard format used to describe each sign type. And so again, we're talking about the function of a sign, its size, its area, not what message it would convey, although some of them will sound like it conveys a certain message, but it won't really have to. But that's what we're after. So, going through each sign type. A-frame signs.
Just following up, maybe I didn't understand. When you're advertising, for example, a hearing P and Z, that's not a policy sign?
So, that would...
Public hearing? And
Yeah. That would be a type of a yard sign. Yard sign, with the way that we currently do them. Because
when you say, well, yeah, they're on the property that's about to come before P and Z. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But in terms of the sign type that's in the code, it'd be a yard sign. That's what it'd be consistent with, what we use currently. So the current code, as I'm sure most of you are aware, for A-frame signs and banner signs has had a sunset provision. So every 2 years, staff was back before the council. Do we want to keep the allowance for A-frames or banner signs in the code or not? And the council would extend it another 2 years. And so that's what's continued to allow A-frame signs and banner signs. It was done that way, so if the council ever decided not to, it'd be easy enough to stop, because otherwise, once it becomes permanent, it becomes harder to go back and say, no, we don't want you to have A-frame signs anymore. But that's been going on long enough, and people have had A-frames long enough that we felt we might as well just take that out of the code. So we've brought it to you at this point without a sunset provision in here. The other part of that discussion or point to make is that the last extension for A-frame signs expired on December 31st. So right now, in today's code, technically, you can't have A-frames or banners. They're no longer legal. Staff's not enforcing that because we haven't had this discussion with council. Based on your direction and what you want to do with A-frames or banners, we'll take appropriate action. But I just want to make sure you were aware that's where we are today.
Yeah, that just triggered a thought, and it might be in here. Are we regulating the time of day when they can have them?
Councilmember Magazine, I believe, I'd have to probably look at that just a little closer on A-frames themselves. I don't recall that we do.
Because right now we have, nobody
do.
obeys it, but we still have a time constraint.
We do put, yes, it's 7 a.m. and 9 p.m.
I'm sorry?
7 a.m. and 9 p.m. So yes, we do have a limitation.
This may be a little off the subject, but we have now 2 code officers, is that correct? Brady?
Yes.
I assume they don't get up in the middle of the night to go see if people are, if it's being obeyed. And so it makes me wonder what, if anything, we need to do about it.
Well, Mayor and council, that's a good question, but I will tell you, I've actually have observed on, I believe it was a Saturday or Sunday, over by the Target Center, removing these temporary signs that we're talking about. Not necessarily A-frames, but we are doing enforcement. So, and then typically a Monday, if there's some of these signs that were out, they are going out and picking them up Monday morning, if they're out there, or collecting them and taking them back to the businesses.
And
So
Councilmember,
we have a person that he works, we have 4 10s, so we have one person that works Monday through Thursday, and then we have another person that works so that he can work the weekends. That was the understanding of hiring him, so that we can get and catch people doing these types of things, so we don't have to wait.
So if somebody keeps their sign out and it's 10 o'clock, we wait till morning, certain time of the morning, to see whether or not they had it out all night.
I would tell you, this is probably one of the areas that's always going to be the challenge in trying to do the enforcement with the hours.
I think this whole thing is going to be tough with regard to
Right.
enforcement. I'm concerned about enforcement of a lot of this.
The biggest challenge we have is just these being left up, like people that do a garage sale, they don't pick up the signs afterwards, they just leave them out there. Same thing sometimes with the real estate. The other thing is, I've seen people actually go up in the medians, which they're really taking their lives in their own hands, crossing the street on Shade to go to the center median to put signs up there, to try to direct people to open houses and such.
As I recall, correct me on this, but if somebody doesn't remove a sign, and our code officers pick it up, don't they have to pay a fine to get it back or something like that?
I'll let John answer that. That may have changed since I recall.
If this is off the subject, we could just keep going, but it occurred to me.
and Councilmember, I don't remember specifically about that. I don't remember specifically if we could charge them a fine. I don't think we typically do. We just let them come pick it up. I will comment that our code officers do occasionally come in early and work late because of the night sky ordinance. And so they will go out early looking when they've got a complaint about a light that's too bright so they can see it. And so they could do the same thing with signs, but it hasn't been, the hours that they're out hasn't been as big an issue on these. And looking through the new code, I see that maybe that's one point that I missed as I went through these, because nowhere currently in the new ordinance with regard to A-frames do I have a time frame. So maybe we need to add that back in.
And it seems to me if people can leave them out all night and they get picked up, and of course a lot of them won't get picked up, and they go to get it and there's no fine, they're just going to keep leaving them out. And so it seems to me there has to be some kind of a fine to get people to understand that if they leave them out, they're going to pay money to get them back.
I have a
wanted to
question.
talk about the sunset provision. So I was on the council when that was happening a lot, and every year we'd get the report of how there was 95% non-compliance, but then we would just, well, not all of us, but the majority of us would continue to extend it even after that. So I don't see that has changed much. So the sunset, rather than having a sunset provision, we have a solid sign ordinance, which I know is going to be difficult, then I prefer that than to continue to, because it obviously wasn't working, so I'm okay with getting rid of it.
Have you had much push, I mean, do the business owners know right now that the A sign has expired, that they're not allowed to have them anymore?
I would be doubtful that they do.
Pardon?
I'm doubtful that they do.
And speaking of these A signs, in the general provisions of 607 B and C, it talks about signs being on public property and placed in a manner that interferes with pedestrian. I mean, almost every single one of these A-frame signs interferes with pedestrians, and they're not properly placed back from the curb, et cetera. And in addition, I think they're really messy. And when you have changed the code, you've taken out 5, 6, and 7, where signs must be in good repair, they must be manufactured by a professional, and they'll be what they should be constructed of. Did you take those out because they're in other parts of the code, or do you think it would be better to keep them in and specifically be in the section where the A-frame definition and regulations are, so that anybody that has them can see them immediately?
Mayor, council member, that's a good question. We have modified that a little bit in terms of the specificity of the current code. That was partially due to some of the challenges our code compliance staff has had in trying to implement it the way that it was currently worded, and the way, particularly when it comes to some of the garage sales and those types of signs, what people can really do. It was maybe not to that quality standard, but still something that, we just typically would allow. So the two ways that we have addressed it are, as you've already alluded to, the definition of A-frame sign, as those standards there in terms of types of material. And that's a little bit of step up from some of the things we currently see, where some people have used a plastic bucket and put a weight in it and then tape the sign to it. That won't be allowed anymore under this code. So in some regards, it will be a step up as we enforce that. And then the other is the provision that we just talked about in 607, that last statement on the guidelines for temporary signs that said.
Another question is, have you considered with we're in a unique, beautiful town. Have you considered having the ordinance include for the downtown businesses for their A-frames to be built in a certain manner and maybe be more architecturally pretty or in conformity, that maybe have the outline of the sign have 4 peaks on it or a fountain or something like that, so that they're more consistent and they look more uniform and not as sloppy, so that it maybe be more attractive and attract people more in the shopping area than just allowing them to be whatever way people think they are. And I know Sharon mentioned that the beauty is in the eye of the beholder and who makes it, but at the same time, these seem to be such a nuisance and such a mess that it might be more aesthetically pleasing to have them be more in conformity, especially downtown.
So, Mayor, Councilmember McMahon, no, in terms of drafting an overall sign ordinance, we didn't try to look at specific areas of town and come up with something like that. I can see the direction you're going, and it could be something that would be helpful in terms of overall placemaking identity to not only downtown, but maybe other parts of the community. I think it would be something that could be considered more specifically in the future. One of the things that I think we need to do is update our town center plan. And so when we do that, maybe that's something that could be considered as part of a discussion with downtown property owners and businesses. Is there a way we can come up with some design standards that would work for everybody, that would help guide things like that, but not in terms of this code?
I mean, it might be something to form a small committee or and maybe have a contest for design or something like that, for 2 or 3 choices for businesses to select the frame. So it would be a lot more pleasing and aesthetically, and add to the uniqueness of the town versus taking it away and not look so sloppy if we're going to allow these A signs to continue.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's the general direction I was going in earlier. I don't think, I wouldn't do it just for downtown. If you're going to do it, you do it for the whole town. I've seen some signs that I swear they look like poster board with a crayon. There's got to be some standards, and it's got to be enforced.
And one thing I want to mention too is a couple of years ago, they talked about wayfinding signs, which they didn't really get to finish, but it was way over budget. But the discussion at that time was about how they should look, and how first class they were going to be. And then in my mind, I was like, yeah, that makes sense, except we have like kind of this other problem going on here with the other signs. So I can see doing that as, if it was something that was affordable, or, again, we talk about where and when, not what, but we can certainly say how it would look. So I would agree with that too. Thanks.
I think it would be kind of neat to maybe get the high school kids involved to design something, a couple outside frames or something like that. But we can discuss that in more detail at a different time. But just to make them look less sloppy, uniformity to me would be better.
So that's not regulating content then? I mean, we brought up colors. I guess I don't see the difference, but
What I was talking about was the frame. Like have like the frame be more designed and unique in the sense that maybe at the top have the Four Peaks emblem, maybe a fountain or something like that, so that the frames are all the same. They're still, you're not going to monitor or control what they're going to say on it, but what you're going to do is provide really nice, aesthetically pleasing frames for A-frame signs for downtown businesses, so there's consistency.
As a business owner, if I'm told this is what your sign frame has to look like, all I see are dollar signs that, yes, you're right. It absolutely would be gorgeous if there were a bunch of A-frame signs all down the street and they all looked identical. However, I purchased my A-frame sign based on price point. It looks great, it's sturdy, but it was the least expensive sign because that's all I could afford at the time. If we have beautiful fountain signs designed by whoever, I feel like we need to be at a point financially where we could help contribute to like a lot of businesses do with the business cards. They have the bulk of the business cards done, and then when folks like you and I come in, they just print our name and our phone number on the card based on what we want. I think we're financially very far where we need to be to do something like that. I love the idea, but as a business owner, it does nothing but freak me out.
I don't think it's something that would be really, really expensive. I mean, you could do it even in plastic or whatever, but that's something that would be kind of tacky. I think it would be better to have more substantial, but that's something we could talk about we don't need to debate it now, but we could talk about it at a later time.
Just one follow-up to that, not to belabor it, but it would seem to me that if we did something like that, we get the chamber involved, and I was, talk about buy in bulk and get much lower prices for them.
And just, sorry, but I don't know that they have to be identical, but I think we really just want them to be nice. So, and I think that kind of goes along with what we're saying they have to be made out of. So maybe there's a compromise to be had there.
Okay, moving on to awning signs. So there's not much change there in terms of the current code. The current code really talks about the ones on the face of the awning, like the top picture. It doesn't really clearly cover the awning, the signs that might sit on top of an awning, so we made that a little bit more clear in the code. Then we get into banners, balloons, and pennants. Here's a page from the current code with regard to how it addresses this topic. Again, I found it rather confusing. It's very much content-based. We couldn't do that in the new code, but we have dropped pennants from the allowance in what we did. So moving into what the new code says, so balloons are separated out from banners, so it's easier to address them instead of being lumped together. Kept the same size provisions and how big the balloons can be, and does not include the inflatable tubes. Allows for 30 days a year. So if we go back here under balloons, 12 hours for a one-day event, whatever. You can do this anything every other 2-week period with a permit kind of thing. So in terms of one length of time, 30 days is longer than current, but it reduces the amount overall as a basic allowance, but does allow for a temporary use permit to be allowed, reviewed in order to have additional time. We couldn't figure out a number to put in this one for the maximum number of balloons you could have. That was too much for us. You'll see other ones we limit the numbers.
Yeah, clarification. 30 days per year means what?
That you can use balloons as part of your temporary signage program.
So if you're a real estate agent, you can attach balloons to your sign if you want.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Banners, so again, this is, overall, it's very similar to current. But do want to point out, because we're going to get into this discussion a little bit more, I've already had it a little bit, banners are not allowed in single residence zones, except if you're non-residential use, a church, a school. In a single residence zone, they can have banners. But single-family home, no banners. Apartments with more than 20 units, that's when you can start having banners in commercial and industrial districts. So we get back a little bit to our discussion about political signs. During this last campaign season, we saw a lot of banners along walls in residential neighborhoods that were political signs. Well, banners are not allowed in residential. And so, again, that gets us back into that discussion about how we balance those out when it comes to interpreting and applying the state statute allowances and what you can otherwise do. But banners in residential neighborhoods are prohibited. So again, this one had the sunset provision in it. We've taken that out. There is a requirement under the current code for a permit for a banner sign. We've not included that at this point in this ordinance, as we've tried to balance the challenges of issuing and tracking the permit versus just tracking the sign otherwise. I'm kind of reconsidering that and thinking maybe we should go ahead and put a permit requirement in here to help us follow that 30 days and when somebody would need a temporary use permit. Citizens have been generally pretty good about knowing the current code requirement and coming in and getting the permits, but not always. So it's still a little bit of a challenge. But actually, anyway, there's pluses and minuses both ways about whether or not we actually require a permit for banners.
Do you think, I'm sorry, do you think of, we've had some homes that had, I guess, for lack of a better word, draping on them on the outside. They don't say, it doesn't say anything, but it's just fabric. And I don't know that that's actually a sign or what we were told that we didn't have anything in our codes or our ordinances to address that, but there have been incidences of that. Would this be a place to put no banners or draping or anything in single-family homes, or is that a whole nother, just in a different area, you know, about your house or keeping your house painted?
So if we go back to our definition of sign, if it's not conveying any type of message, if it's just a fabric, a shade device, really, keeping the sun off the side of the house, then I'm not sure we could call it a sign, so I think we probably would have to deal with it someplace else in the code if we want to regulate that. On a related note, that just reminds me, because we talked a minute ago about the inflatable tubes that you can't use as signs are prohibited. I remember seeing during the holiday season an inflatable Santa Claus in front of a residential house. So would we call that a sign? You can't have those inflatable tubes. But anyway, that's beside the point probably. So permits.
I was going to say, as long as we can regulate time, I guess we could have a little break at Christmas time or something. I don't know. Councilman?
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm having a lot of trouble with the enforcement issue. A lot of this stuff just isn't enforceable. Maximum 32 square feet. We're going to have the code people go out and measure these. Apartments with more than 20 units. What if they have 25? You can't even count apartment units in some buildings because they're inside. 30 days per year. Who's going to keep track of it? I'm having a lot of trouble with a lot of this because I just don't think it's enforceable. And should we have things, should we have requirements like these that we know from the very beginning aren't enforceable? That's a rhetorical question, but I got to say I'm real concerned about it. I don't know why we're doing it.
I have a question about that. Maybe the banners here, it says that a permit isn't required. But if you have a permit, then you can regulate what the banner size is, how many days it is, et cetera, because otherwise, how are you going to know?
Correct. Yes, and it's by a complaint basis or the code officer seeing a banner and, you know, first of all, it looks too big or doesn't, you know, whatever. And they can measure them to see. but it does help, I think, again, on balance. Again, there are administrative issues with trying to issue them and track them that way, and that's why I initially left it out, but as I've been thinking about it since then, I think maybe there are fewer issues by including it, and so I think it probably should come back consistent with today's code and include a permit requirement for banners, because there are enough of them that go on, and I think it will facilitate that enforcement.
So are you saying it's not cost effective if someone has a banner to require them to have a temporary permit because of the administrative, or?
Just this is the initial permit. The temporary use permit, if they want to go beyond the 30 days, I think that's fine. There's a charge for each temporary use permit they might apply for.
Okay, so
That covers
if
that.
I wanted to hang a big banner like that, I need to get a permit, or do I need to do anything to let the town know I'm going to put up a banner like that so it can be regulated?
So current code, yes. The draft code, no, but I'm thinking I should amend the draft code so it does require the permit.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So John, how much would a permit, or currently how much is a permit for a banner like this? Is it?
It's pretty cheap. I know Paul has told me a couple of times what it is, but I forget.
Well, I guess it's in
like
our
$20 or something.
comprehensive fee schedule.
Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
Can you, 25?
25, okay.
Thank you.
And so I don't know what's the new fee code structure calls for, but anyway, I probably would say, yeah, we should probably require a permit if we're gonna do that, and maybe look at the price. And then could you just quickly review again what you said initially about the political banners? I mean, we did see a lot on homes this season, so did you say those are allowed or not allowed, or is that covered under the state statute? I didn't catch that.
It's probably another discussion that we'll need to have before we come back with our attorney and talk through the nuances of the state statute versus our town code. I know we talked at one point with the council about I think we talked about it here, in terms of the signs in the medians, and that our code does not allow signs in the median, so we didn't care if it was a political sign or what kind of sign it was. We were going to pull it, and we were treating everybody the same with regard to that. We probably could have done the same thing this last year with banners, because the code currently doesn't allow banners in residential districts. But because of kind of still that confusion about how we balance our code versus the state statutes, we let the banners go. But I think by adopting a new code that is, I guess part of the trouble we had with the current code too is it has both political and ideological signs, and there's more kind of control on the political sign, less so on the ideological. But what's an ideological sign? So we're getting rid of that in the new code. We won't have that distinction anymore that would have to try to work through. So it's really, a banner's not allowed. We don't care if it's a vote for this or a whatever. Banners aren't allowed. And so I think we may be in a better position in future elections to say no banners of any kind. But again, I think that's a discussion that need to have a little bit further with our legal counsel.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably where I would lean, and like Alan said, I mean, how do why have all these rules if it's just almost impossible to follow up and enforce them? But
I have a question for Aaron. If it was a banner like that, or a political banner, can a political banner be subject to temporary permit, or is that regulating content?
Well, there's at least two parts.
Okay.
Two parts to that answer. I think the first is, one, we always have to figure out, are we running into our own regulation as opposed to state preemption, right? State preemption by the statute. But setting that issue aside, I would think that because this is, John, I believe the square footage that you're talking about here for banners in excess of what the state law allows anyway. So if there's a size issue, if there's an issue with size, for example, we'd be within both our code and within the state law to regulate that. Mm-hmm. If it's sign issue, for example, I'd need to get more specifics on any detailed case. But yeah, I imagine there could be some crossover between the two.
Building wall signs, largely the same as current code, not allowed in residential, non-residential uses in residential zones, so forth. Drive-through signs. So again, this may look like a content-based sign because it's called drive-through signs, and you're most likely going to see them by a drive-through with a menu on it. But that's not really what it does. You can put any message on the sign located next to a drive-through lane, but it gives the size requirements, location requirements, and those types of things. The message could be anything. But it'll typically be used for the menu for the drive-through.
What is, John, what does removed speaker box
So
standards mean?
the current sign ordinance has some provisions with regard to the speaker box stuck in here in the sign ordinance, which didn't make much sense.
I
And
see.
so we've removed it.
So John, are those regulations put somewhere else in, or speaker boxes
Not at this point.
regulated or not?
Not at this point. We think, overall, we think there are enough other rules that regulate where these things are. That's not a big issue. But
I think, I remember it came up sometime in the illustrious history of Fountain Hills, but
probably,
but,
why it's in here because.
yeah, so. I guess we don't necessarily need it, but, you never know.
So another little bit of a conundrum are flags. So the rules that are written in the ordinance largely contemplate it's going to be a United States flag or state flag, some type of governmental flag. But not all flags are those. And once we can't regulate content anymore, they can much easier be something else. And so we had to look at how we can regulate this within the parameters. Time, place, manner, number, size, whatever. And so it's similar, but a slightly different approach in terms of defining the number of poles that can be allowed, one per single-family lot, max 5 for model home complex kind of operation. Think Toll Brothers up there, whatever they might have, a bunch of these. And then in all other situations, you can have a maximum of 2 poles, and then a maximum of 2 flags per pole. We have another related zoning issue that we'll bring to you in terms of Section 507 of the zoning ordinance that allows taller poles if you've got, again, a governmental flag on it. Well, we can't regulate that, so we'll have to deal with that. In the current code, the maximum sign flag size for a corporate flag is 15 square feet, and for a governmental flag is 60 square feet. Well, we're not regulating content. We want to allow, most people do, if they do, these are mostly governmental flags, they're mostly American flag people do. So we left the size in here at the 60 square feet. We could lower that if you think that's too big. There are some, again, the relationship between the size of the flag and the pole, and if you're in a residential district, it's probably going to bring the flag size down anyway to make all that work out. But that's where we chose to do it, was go with that size.
Are we bound by a law that it has to be 60
Nope.
square feet?
No, not that, no.
As long as it's the same size, no matter what, for whatever the
Right,
flag.
yeah, if we want to set 45 or 50 or 25 or whatever you want to set, we can set a different number as the maximum size.
So under this proposal, then, virtually any commercial lot here in Plat 2A could have 2 flagpoles with 4 flags?
Mm-hmm. Except they've got to get it
Yeah.
on their property, but
Right. And I know there's a lot of zero clearance in Plat 2A, but any commercial lot in town then can have 2 flagpoles under this proposal.
that's right.
Just not sure if that's what we
Yeah.
want, but.
Yeah. What was the thinking behind that? It just, on the face of it, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean,
I have a feeling it was probably one set is government flags, the second set is the flag of the business, like Marriott will fly a Marriott flag, that
yeah,
kind of thing.
My concern is the, in commercial, where you got a drugstore here and a Safeway over here, and they can each have a flagpole, each with 2 flags on it. Is that right?
So I was looking back at the current code. I'm sorry, Councilmember, while you were saying
Drugstore
that.
here, Safeway next to it. They can each have a flagpole with 2 flags on it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense to me. Or 2 flagpoles. So that's 4 flagpoles or 4 flags right near each other. It just
All
doesn't,
I'm thinking about is my tiny little piece of property with 2 flagpoles on it and how tacky that would be. That's all I can think of. But again, if you look at the
Shoot
bigger
before.
piece of properties, it kind of makes sense to me.
well, it doesn't make any sense to me. I think we ought to take a look at it.
That's all in the eye of the beholder, Sharon Grzelbowski.
I'm not doing it on my property because I just said I thought it would be tacky.
So, again, this was along with just kind of general temporary sign, political sign issues. These are mostly having to do with flags for, the state, for the country, and so it's become sensitive. And so we've started off with this trying to be as open as we could, because that's what really you see. Most people don't fly these other type of flags. But here in the council discussion, certainly there are some additional opportunities. We could, one flagpole per acre in commercial districts or something, so it gets, you have to be larger to have the second pole.
And what's the thinking behind 2 flags on 1 pole?
You do see that. You see the United States flag and the Arizona flag below it, that type of thing. That's fairly common.
Okay, I just hope staff can go back and take a look at this provision and see whether or not it really makes sense.
And I think we could also talk about maximum 60 square foot in commercial districts and 20 feet in residential districts or something like that. We could probably also look at that. Again, it's not content based. It's based on location and zoning. So we can take a look at some of those things.
I have a question.
Let's see here. I think I've got no, that's it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Not to complicate matters, but this talks about flags and size and flagpoles. But oftentimes I see people for flags, hang them on their house or put them on their fence or whatever. Does that then transmute it from a flag to a banner, requiring a permit? Not to complicate matters, but a lot of people don't have flagpoles.
Yes, thank you
but they have flags.
for bringing that up, Mayor, Council Member. I had some of this discussion earlier today with one of my code compliance officers. Again, Aaron probably needs to be part of this discussion as we continue to sort this out. Definition for flag talks about it being on a pole. So for us to count it as a flag, it must be on a pole.
Okay.
Otherwise, it would be considered a banner, but even then we have a little bit of a definitional problem based on material, because a banner is made out of certain types of vinyls and plastics, and a flag's made out of fabric, cloth.
Oh.
And so, but if they're trying to use a flag like a banner, well, a banner's not allowed in a residential district. So
Okay.
you couldn't do that. You can only do the flag on a flag pole. But again, it's a nuance that we need to make sure we've talked through and have clear.
Okay, so the woman's email that I sent you, of what things she was complaining about, I think 1 or 2 of them she said were flags, but they weren't, they were just put out like banners.
Okay.
So is that possible to regulate that?
So I
And that's
believe-
in a residential area?
Yes, I believe so, but again, I want to make sure we have a discussion with our counsel here about those nuances of difference and make sure he agrees that we're covered.
Okay.
Okay. Freestanding wall signs, so it replaces what we have currently in the code as a subdivision sign primarily. And it's, again, pretty similar. Under canopy signs, pretty similar to today's. Monument signs, again, pretty similar. Some differences here in terms of number size on residential, commercial, or industrial, or, then you asked earlier about the on-site directional signs. So this again kind of replaces the inter-exit type of sign or internal, telling you where you can go type of signs. Fairly small, but meant to be next to the street or driveway. And then current code talks about for sale signs. That's based on message. We can't do that, so we're calling it a post and board sign, because that's what most of them are, this construction type. And so the allowances we have in here for those, again, very similar to today's code. 1 per street front is allowed. Projecting signs, sign walkers, no changes there. Vehicle signs were in a previous part of the code. We've moved it here because it's a sign type. Must be on operator. So currently there's a big section of the code that talks about based on vehicle weight. That's really hard for us to enforce or to use, so we're taking that out. but just that there must be an operable vehicle so that it moves and doesn't stay in one spot all the time. Wall signs, or excuse me, window signs, again, essentially the same. Here's where we move the provision for neon signs, because the only place the code currently allows them is in a window. So we made it just part of this provision. And again, they can be permanent, they can be temporary, depending upon how they're done. Then the yard signs. So currently today, we have garage sale signs, open house signs, contractor signs that all use the same basic form. Little poles, a small sign, fairly cheaply made. These are all now yard signs. They're allowed in all zoning districts, even residential, because that's, again, where you're going to have your garage sales. That's where you're going to have your contractor that came and fixed your plumbing or whatever, gave you a new roof and put that little sign in the yard type of thing.
John, garage sales.
Yes.
I take it we don't have any particular regulations?
For garage sales, they're coming up.
Okay, because some of them are really ugly.
So yes, they are, and it will be a bit of a challenge enforcement-wise, but our enforcement officers do work that, and that's what Officer Hatcher really works on a lot on Fridays and Saturdays, Sundays when he's working, going out and addressing those.
And John, again,
So-
the ones you just had, those are not in the right of way. Those are, you're still talking about, right now, this little part is having it on a yard, in the yard.
So this sign type can be in the right-of-way when it's used as a residential directional sign.
So when you have one of these that is in the right of way, and I think we saw some of this fairly recently where there's 5 or 6 signs in a row really close together, and they all say the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have anything about placement, minimum space between them, or?
So we're going to see that in just a second, too.
Okay.
Got a lot of good lead-ins here. Thank you. Want to keep see what's coming up next.
Mayor, John?
Yes.
Is this correct that yard sales can be 8 square feet and 5 feet tall?
Not in a single residence district.
Okay.
Because they're also, in that case, they're probably the contractor sign on the commercial property that's under construction or whatever.
But it says all zoning districts.
No, it says single residence is 6 foot, 3 foot tall. All other is 8 foot. So not in single residence.
Okay.
But they're allowed in all zoning districts. But then, those two differences. And there's only one per lot. Okay. Electronic message centers. Had a lot of discussion about this one between sign companies, sign association, dark sky folks. The draft code was recommended to you from the P&Z, has a 40 nit limit on the lights at night. After we did that, we had further input and recognized it really should stay at the 100 nit that's in the current code. And the dark sky folks have agreed that is appropriate. And so that's what we would plan to come back with in a final code to the council.
John, is there any limitation on these? So if every business next to each other wanted one of these kind of signs, they could all get them?
So mostly they're either actually, in terms of a sign type, they're either a monument sign or a wall sign. So when somebody has their monument sign, and there's certain limits to the number of those on a single property, 1 per 300 feet of frontage, it's not per business, it's per the center. You couldn't get a bunch lined up closer together. If you have a bunch of small lots, each lot could have its own monument sign that could be an electronic message center, or they could have them on their, mounted on the building as their wall sign.
So if along Saguaro, though, if all of those different businesses decided they wanted this kind of sign and it was feasibly, would fit, they all would be allowed to do that.
Right. They could.
Yeah. Yeah, we had someone complain that the fountain looked like Las Vegas. Yeah, okay, thanks.
I have a question.
Yes.
On these electronic message signs, can we limit the number in town? Because I know there's a new one in town, and to me, it's distracting, and it's like a billboard to me versus just a sign.
Right.
And we don't allow billboards, but for some reason, they just seem like they're larger than life.
Right.
They're, to me, a distraction. I mean, I know it probably complies with the light requirements and the night sky and everything, but
So
it doesn't look, to me, it doesn't look like it fits in the town.
Right. Mayor, council member, there are communities that prohibit them. Fountain Hills allows them for, I'm not sure how long they've been allowed. There are several around town, but it is possible. A little bit of a challenge once you have started allowing something to go back and now not allow it. Attorneys agreeing with that over there. I'm not sure you'd like my next statement, but it's certainly possible. You could face some legal challenges to now come back and say they're not allowed. To put a number limit, you can have 10 or 20 in the town and that's it. I think that's a challenge too legally, because how do you pick those winners and losers? So the next thing from there is, the size that you allow. And we already don't allow, full animation. You got to, it's got to be a message, 8 seconds and a change and whatever, some of those types of things, so that try to keep down some of that impact that they present. But I think you'd be challenged at this point to actually prohibit them.
So there's no way we can make the regulations tighter or more difficult to prevent them from really like sprouting up everywhere, or no?
Again, I think if we want to look at some other size limitations to them, if you want to do some things to extend the message time so they're less desirable because the message doesn't change as often, some of those things might slow down their proliferation. We could consider some of those things if the council wants us to look at
Okay.
them.
All right,
So.
thank you.
Okay, so this chart is in here. Going back to a little bit of the beginning, the sign code, because we are not regulating content of signs, and there's certain temporary signs that we probably have to allow just because. The for sale signs is the kind of the most obvious one. I don't know what we do if we prohibited those and people wanted to sell their property. Then the next one's those the yard signs, in terms of, say, we're not going to allow those, good luck with your garage sales and open houses and those things. Because you're going to allow some temporary signs, since you can't control the content, they can now be used for a wide variety of things that you didn't necessarily intend. And so putting the limits on the number is how you control it. Each sign type by itself has some limits already built into it. One per lot, one per occupancy or whatever, and certain size limits. This is put in here to try to regulate the aggregate then of the numbers of temporary signs you might see on your property. You might have a post and board and an A-frame and a yard sign on a property. And so this kind of is an attempt to keep that from getting out of hand. So this is the chart. It was in the ordinance. After doing this and putting this together, I put together this chart. And this just summarizes the actual regulations from, whoops, that changed my screen there, didn't I? I didn't know how to do that. In the ordinance, so if you look at A-frame, T-frames, they're allowed in single residence only as a residential directional. We'll talk about those again in a minute. Multifamily only as a directional sign. They're allowed in commercial, industrial, size 6 square feet, 3 feet tall, and then the number that they're allowed, so it's one per business in anything but the residential. The balloons, the banners, how much they're allowed in each one. When I look at this list of what just the basic allowance is per the code, and then go back and compare this chart, this really isn't very limiting in comparison. It's really about the same amount of signage. So in a single-family district, you could have a yard sign because somebody just came and re-roofed your house, and then you also just want to put another yard sign in your yard because you want to say, save the whales. And as long as you don't have any more than those two for street front, and you don't have any more than 12 square feet total amongst all the signs, you're good. So that's your limit. You decide you want to put your house for sale, you got to take down one of the other signs so you can put the for sale sign up because you're at your limit. And so that goes on into the other districts. Again, these were numbers that put in here, kind of based on this, what the code was, and trying to make sure we had a handle on the maximums. Is this too much, too little, just right? You continue to look at this and thoughts. But here also is we have the separation. I think that was a question earlier. So in these districts, in the multifamily and the commercial districts, you got to space them out, which keeps us from getting some of that clutter that was talked about before. But again, all these things have an enforcement issue. You're in a commercial center down here, and you've got multiple tenants, and I go out and I put my little A-frame out there first thing in the morning, and then another business comes out and puts their A-frame sign out 30 feet from mine, and it's minimum 50 feet. The code enforcement officer comes by, and here's two signs 30 feet apart. Who did what? Take them both back, and whatever. You get that little bit of a enforcement challenge with doing some of those separation issues, but it is still the way we have to try to keep some of that spacing, keep the clutter down. Is 50 foot the right number? Should it be more? Should it be less?
John, I think, again, this is not talking about the right-of-way, right? This is talking about on their property.
So with the A-frames and the in the yard sale signs, when they're used in a certain way, they can be in the right-of-way, but otherwise, yes, Mayor, you're correct. That is off the right-of-way.
I guess I guess just speaking for myself, I'm not having as much of issues with things that people do on their property. I am really mostly concerned about the right-of-way and driving down, Saguaro and having this exact same sign over and over and over. And I think maybe we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's my main concern, the right-of-way.
We're almost done. The comments there. So, residential directional signs. So this is a replacement for a yard sale, open house, estate sale, Joey's birthday party signs. Again, we can't regulate the content, but if somebody's having an event in the residential neighborhood at their home, and they need to get people from the main street to their house, these are some of the basic rules that allow placement of those signs. So one of the challenges we've had today is, and I don't remember which one's exactly which, but between the open house and the garage sale signs, the provisions along Shea are slightly different, and at least one of them measures from the right-of-way, which nobody knows where the right-of-way is. But you can measure from the street edge. So we've changed it to a measurement from the pavement at 150 feet minimum distance. And then also based on some discussion with regard to frontage road medians, so along Saguaro or Palisades, not the center road median, but the frontage road median, to allow signs when used in this way to be in those medians to help direct people on into the neighborhood. Because if you go further back, it gets too far from the roadway sometimes to see these types of little directional signs.
I don't know what your what your thoughts are on that, because we prevent them in medians, and could be a confusing issue here. And again, I don't know, if you allow signs in the right-of-way, a sign could literally be put in front of your house that doesn't say something that you agree with, or just says, yard sale, and another yard sale sign, another yard sale sign, 6 of them. I don't know, that's the right-of-way, because people will see it, it's like in front of your house, but it's in the right-of-way. So I think that's just a real concern of mine.
Well, and I'd have to add, I think maximum of 6 is way too many. I don't know what the magic number is, but I don't think it's 6. And totally don't agree with frontage road median either. For decades, we haven't allowed that. And seems like with the political signs, some popped up. And then I know during the pandemic, we loosened some of the restrictions. So we were allowing restaurants and some of the businesses, frontage road median, but definitely against that.
So the Mayor and Councilmember, the number came from, again, thinking about getting somebody from Saguaro or Palisades into your neighborhood to find your open house or your garage sale. You have 1 on your property and 5 more getting you all the way out to that main street. It's not that you cluster 6 in one spot. And these all would be in a right-of-way because they're little signs, again, directing people back. So that's where we came up with the number. Gives you 5 to kind of place strategically to get you from that 1 all the way into a part of a neighborhood. Again, is that too many? It could be.
Well, I'll get into that momentarily. I have like 4 pictures to show council, and
Yep, we can go there.
I beg indulgence for 5 minutes. I just put a lot of my thoughts together. Some of it's a little bit repetitive, but, just anyway. Let's do it.
I'm gonna have trouble again here. Mike. It says this to me all the time. I get to the end of these things, I can't find the mouse to get over here to get out of this thing. Oh, it's way over there someplace. Okay, thank you. And so, here we go.
Well, you can slowly scroll through them. Like I said, there's only 4 of them, but, and I want to preface this by saying I shot these like 2 years ago, so that was before we had our second code enforcement officer, and I think it was on a Saturday afternoon. And so it's no statement against staff or enforcement or anything like that. It's just situations I saw out there on a weekend. And then the last one is right there in the. So just want to say, Fountain Hills has struggled with sign regulations long before we incorporated. And since we've become a municipality, I think previous councils have dealt with this issue 3, 4, or 5 times in the past. So as we know, there's no easy or quick answers. And I'll be upfront with my biased view. I've never really liked signs. And I'm not talking about our commercial buildings and the need for professional and permanent signage. I think such signage adds to the overall architecture and look of a building. It helps businesses be found by consumers, serves as advertising, and such signs do contribute to the overall business climate. But my issue has always been the extraneous signage, the A-frames, the tent signs, garage sales, directional signs for open houses, the banners. I feel this type of signage is detrimental to the overall aesthetics and business appeal of our community. I think it detracts. I think it can be a traffic safety hazard. It's visual pollution, and it clutters up the landscape. While I realize there's a big difference between professional open house signs and homemade garage sale signs on cardboard boxes, I just feel the sheer numbers often outweigh any advantages. We profess to live in an environmentally sensitive community and love our mountain views and natural desert landscapes. We pass ordinances to protect our dark skies, yet we seemingly have no issue about cluttering up our rights-of-ways, sidewalks, landscaped areas in front of businesses with all kinds of questionable signage. And trust me, I've heard all the arguments over the decades from the business and real estate communities. They say such signage is needed for branding, for awareness, walk-in traffic, lost customers driving around, etc. And look, I'm a business owner and chamber member myself, and with a newspaper background for 3 decades, I'm well aware of how advertising and marketing works. But I think we can be better than this. I think marketing has changed, and I don't think the business community has done a good job of policing itself. And I know the mom and pop stores are looking for every advantage they can gain in this world of Amazon, but there are a myriad of ways to accomplish this without placing a plastic sign on the sidewalk when you have an awesome sign just 10 feet behind you on your storefront. I think the town can be business friendly without allowing these distracting items. Maybe we can offer a reduced sign permit fee to someone who pledges to not use these types of extraneous signs. I don't necessarily have all the answers, but and I know compromise is probably a thing that needs to happen, but I believe one element that's not reflected in this current proposal is just the advent of technology and digital platforms. I mean, this is 2021, not 1971. Does an A-frame sign for a mortgage broker suddenly convince a motorist to turn into the parking lot and start signing papers for a loan? Well, I don't think so. And between websites, Google, and other search engines, people do their research ahead of time, or they talk to their neighbors and friends. Facebook and Nextdoor are awash with local folks looking for recommendations on plumbers, barbers, massage therapists, what have you, where to find retail products, unique gift items, etc. People then respond, and then the consumer checks an app on their smartphone to pinpoint the exact address and location. Maybe they place a phone call or two. Then Google Maps or others take the customer right to the storefront. Smartphones are everywhere. So I'm not sure A-frames and all this other stuff are really needed in this age of technology. Even tourists or day trippers come into town prepared, likely having done a search for the top 10 things to do in town, places to eat, unique shops, etc. And if I'm a newcomer looking to buy a home in Fountain Hills, don't I first check out Zillow or Realtor.com, perhaps fine-tuning my search to some local real estate agency after that? Or do I drive out to Fountain Hills this coming Sunday and look for random open house signs and just follow them as such? People can also check out print advertising, telephone directory, or ask the chamber for a list of members in their respective commercial fields. In garage sales, kind of the same thing. You can go look in the paper, on Craigslist, Facebook, because people advertise their garage sales that way, besides all the cluttering signs. What I found over the decades is that you allow one directional sign, you get 3. You allow an A-frame during daylight hours, typically stays up all the time. You allow temporary signs and medians, you get them everywhere. We have doubled our code enforcement staff, but it seems to me there are numerous other more important issues they should be dealing with rather than chasing down illegal garage sale signs and such. I don't think the current proposal will solve the enforcement issue. And I know some, getting on political signs, I know some constituents will say, well, what about political signs, Mike? That's kind of a double standard, don't you think? Well, as the mayor pointed out, for years we successfully kept such signs out of our town, but I guess the state legislature felt they knew better and handcuffed our ability to regulate them. For the record, I don't like political signs either, And I think this past election cycle is the worst I've seen, and I just don't see it getting any better year after year. So do we simply accept proposed revisions, taking out any reference to content? Or do we truly look at serious sign code revisions for the betterment of our overall business community and our appearance as a town? End of my story. Thank you.
Councilman?
I'd like to thank Councilman Charno for that very thoughtful statement and just say that I completely and totally agree with everything he said. I just don't know what the answer is. I don't know that we can start over, but I think it's worth listening to what he had to say and seeing if there's some way to modify our approach to signs.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, John, thanks for the time and effort that you put into this. I didn't say anything all night. Mike, that was very well said. I agreed with a lot of the things you said. One thing that I want to talk about is we should not regulate the American flag, period. If someone wants to have the American flag on their house or on the side of their house or displayed on some way other than a pole, that's their business. So I won't get a permit, nor would I think that anybody should get a permit to display the American flag. If people or residents are offended by the American flag, they can move to another country. What is the time? This was the biggest complaint I hear from people. What is the time that it takes staff for a permit to be approved?
For a sign, I assume you're asking.
For a sign.
Mostly we get them done within a couple of days.
Okay, so things have improved greatly
Yes.
because things were horrible. So thank you. If it is really 2 days or, I mean, if it's anything under whatever, I think it was 10 days, Grady.
Councilman, you're absolutely right. Vice Mayor, he is correct. John, I think, was largely responsible for getting that process improved. We also had an individual that was holding things up that is no longer with us.
Awesome, because if we want to attract businesses to this town and people open up a business and spend their hard-earned money to open up businesses, they shouldn't have to wait really long to get a sign that would display it. So on my list is the time for a permit, the American flag. I just think that we should be very cautious when we talk about like a business that had a lighted sign or something like that. I don't think we're close to saying that this is Las Vegas or anything. I actually looked at Councilmember Grzybowski and I said, what signs is everybody talking about that's so earth-shattering? I don't know. I drive around and I'm not distracted by these signs. So maybe that's because I'm from Chicago. I don't know. But I think we should be very cautious when we start making all these rules and everything, because I think we should attract businesses, and I don't think we should, basically make it a non-friendly business community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman? Councilwoman?
The sign thing is a tough conversation. I agree with the councilman that the lit signs are different, and that's probably what catches our eye, but it's current times. Everybody's doing it, so I feel like it's not something we should even have a conversation about backing out of. One of the things, I feel like it's been a couple years, Mayor Dickey, you actually brought this up today, wayfinding signs. We've got wayfinding signs out there, but they're not brilliant. If it was something we had money for, I really feel like it would help the town to drive people into the town, but unfortunately, it's something we had to postpone because we just don't have the money for it. Again, I'm not solving any problems here. I'm just mentioning if we had that, that would help our businesses. Yes, I think the signs are tacky. I've put up tacky signs myself in my day, and it's a necessary evil. I don't know that, obviously, we're not going to solve it today.
Thank you. Councilman?
Yeah, John, how do these regulations affect HOAs?
How many regulations affect HOAs? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, we got, all of this,
So,
and I'm just wondering, if HOAs have to go by this, for example, people who live in HOAs,
So, yes, HOAs, our zoning ordinance is effective, HOA or non-HOA property. If they have something in their HOA that's more restrictive, and they want to enforce it through their means, they can do that. If they have something less restrictive written up in their covenants, it doesn't matter, our code applies.
okay, thank you.
I'll also just comment on that. I know that a number of homeowners associations also restrict the number of like garage sales that you can have. Where I live, you can only do it twice a year. And a lot of people try to coincide it with the great fair weekends and things like that. But my understanding it's, in the case of MPOA, which carries probably the majority of homes that are in the MPOA in town, they purposely try not to have their CC&Rs more restrictive than the town. So they'll always, pretty much ours will always be stricter and stronger than theirs.
And one other question for Grady. Do you or does anybody get any reports from our code officers on numbers of violations, types of violations, anything like that?
It's more anecdotal. I don't believe I get reports. We could certainly provide that kind of information to council, but I typically see things, and I drive around on weekends, and like I said, I think it was about a month ago, I was kind of forgot, it was a Sunday, I'm pretty sure it was Sunday, we had been my wife and I were at Target, and I saw one of our town trucks. I'm like, what is this truck doing on a Sunday? And sure enough, it was Vince, and it was over where the Bank of America was, and there was all these like stake signs that were illegal that he was grabbing. And so, but no, we don't have a report, but I do know, since the council authorized the second position, it's made a world of a difference in the community. I mean, we're seeing a lot more enforcement.
The reason I mentioned it wasn't necessarily A signs and so on. It was when I look at what we have in front of us, certain size banners, certain this for certain numbers of units in an apartment building, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a million things in here. I have no idea how we're going to enforce them unless you're going to hire another six personnel.
Well, it's a good question, but I think what gives me some hope with this is that they're currently enforcing what we have now that has a lot of regulatory, aspects to it. So they're off going and measuring signs that are up, and they're going ahead and following up with notice of violations. And so there were some things that came out of this tonight that I thought were good ideas. I like the idea of the permits, is in that lets us kind of track and make sure that they're doing this, from the get-go properly. So for the, if the council, for instance, didn't want to do away with the temporary signs, it seems like that's a question right now. Do we want to allow, or at least in the right-of-way, do we want to allow those or not? But I believe that the staff, they're very well trained. They know what they need to do. And I don't think that this is overcomplicating what they currently do for their enforcement.
I'm wondering, and I don't want to make anybody's job harder, but I wonder if there's some kind of a checklist where they could, A signs removed, 3, banners oversized, 2, something very simple, so that we can keep an eye on it to see whether or not this is really working.
I think what you'll see, because I think all of us were kind of shocked that with the current sign ordinance that it was allowing up to 6 directional signs. I think a lot of us know that most of these violations are egregious. You have people, and they won't go with the 3, or they won't go with the 6, they'll go with 12. And then you'll see somebody else that has another 6 or 12. And so the point is, for these code enforcement staff, it's very easy. The stuff sticks out to them like a sore thumb. They can very obviously just eyeball and see where the violations are. Unfortunately, this does take up a lot of time. It's a never-ending battle. I think most of us were really hoping that these guys, and they've done a really good job, but we'd like to have them focus more on property maintenance and people maintaining their homes.
Yeah, I don't want to be misunderstood. I think they're doing as good a job as they can given their situation. And I also want to say to John, you've heard a lot of some feedback, some criticism. This is not aimed at you. I think what you've done is incredible. It's an incredible amount of work. It just becomes a question of interpretation and whether or not we want to move some things a little bit.
Correct, yes. Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember. That's certainly part of the reason for being here tonight. To some degree, I've worked in a little bit of a vacuum because we haven't had this discussion with the council. And so we started with trying to stay pretty similar to what we have. And so now you give me some feedback on where we may want to make some adjustments to respond to the council's policy direction.
I have a couple of points I'd like to make. Mike, your pictures make that look really bad. The number of signs in that median. Can we restrict the number of realtor open house signs in a median? Can we say no more than 1 or 2 and get the word out to the realtors? If your sign's out there and there's already somebody there, you need to go to another area or put it somewhere else. Is there a way to do that? I don't know. And then I want to take a little bit of exception with Mike on the A-frames for our local businesses. If you're sitting back in a plaza, not everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody who has a smartphone is smart enough to use them. There's a lot of seniors in our town that don't use the Google Maps or whatever it is. And I know firsthand from working in one of the local establishments, at least a dozen times somebody said, "Oh, I saw your sign. It got me right where I needed to get to." So I think the businesses have, I don't want to say a right, but you know, it's helpful to them. I mean, especially if they're sitting back off the road somewhere, you know. So we can't discount that totally. But again, I don't know if we can limit the number of signs in a median or.
I think Grady's going to answer that because I don't think we allow them at all in median.
Yeah, so what is...
Or on these corners.
Yeah,
you
so
know.
what is proposed here, so what we're seeing, this is right away, this particular picture here. So, but we do have, like on the frontage roads, if you go up further, this is Palisades, so as you
Right.
go up south, the frontage road, we currently do not allow in that median, but it's proposed to change that to allow it. And I think I'm hearing the majority would prefer not to allow any signs in the median, because what happens is some of these folks don't realize the difference between a center median and a median on a frontage road. So it just makes it a lot easier if it's, you know, you're just black and white, no signs in medians, period.
Did we have any speaker cards on this? No? I think
Are you getting tired of me?
you're getting a lot of messages here, but I think there's an overall feel for trying to, whatever we do, that we are prioritizing it. So when we talk about enforcement, that's the difference between, we had one code enforcement person, then we had a retreat where it was clear that we wanted this to be an area of priority, so then we have another one, and now I think if that's the message, then that's what it will be going forward. This is obviously a conversation that has to keep happening, Grady, and if you want to kind of tell us what you'd like.
Yeah,
or-
so let me just kind of help maybe wrap this up. We don't think this is going to be done, you know, tonight, and clearly I'm pretty confident we come back the next time. We'll come back with a little bit more refinement from what you saw tonight based on the feedback. I think this is probably going to take maybe 2 more attempts before we get it to the point where we have consensus on what the council truly wants. So don't feel like, oh, we didn't get it right the first time. We're listening. But you know what I've noticed is that when we see things and we have more discussion, that jogs different thoughts and ideas. And so let's do this. We'll come back. I think we've taken some really good notes based on the direction we've received from you tonight. We'll come back with another discussion similar to this with some of the suggested language and then get you to buy off on that. And if you see anything we can't get agreement on, then we'll probably have to come back a third time before it's finalized. Does that sound like a plan? Great. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and everyone that's been involved with this for so long. Pardon me? Oh, yes.
Mayor, if I may, would you be willing to grant a slight recess so that we can stretch a little bit and
No, dang it. Yeah.
maybe a 5 to 7 minute?
No, I wouldn't do that.
Thanks, everyone. We have our one more item to go, which is we're going to be talking about sponsorships, naming rights, and waivers of fees. And Grady, do you want to start?
Yes, I'll just do a brief introduction. So the council recalls that when we were going through and evaluating our cost of service, we had a cost of service study that culminated with a proposed user fee study. I think it was back in October or September, October. The vice mayor brought up a really good point and asked us about the annual value of our fee waivers and what the cost might be. So I believe it was in October that actually you received that. And that spreadsheet is actually in your packet. But as we were looking at it, we wanted to bring to you, as part of that discussion, also the policy that we have on sponsorship and naming rights policy, which really encompasses sponsorships, naming rights, and fee waivers for facility rentals and special events. Rachel has been very close to this issue. We basically had this policy that was in existence in 2014, and we amended it in 2016 to address some issues that we were dealing with at that time. Namely, there was an event that was trying to come through that the staff and I didn't recommend because it was going to be something that they were wanting a fee waiver, and we wanted the council to weigh in on it. And as a result of that, the council got into this discussion about certain events that have been here even before the town was created should be considered legacy, and they should have certain grandfathering. And then we also introduced event fees that were tiered based on the first time that they were trying to organize and present an event. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, who's going to go through her presentation. We realize everyone's kind of exhausted from John's last presentation. I assure you that was not by design. So, but with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Goodwin.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Mayor, Council, that was a really great summary of how we got to where we are tonight. This policy, for all intents and purposes, is very much a living document. I know we all know that living documents change as things evolve, and that's very much what this is, and that's what this conversation is tonight, is to get some of your feedback as as our situation has evolved since 2016, and then taking some feedback from what staff has identified, and then really getting your feedback as well so that we can develop a new version of this policy. So I'm going to dive in. Please feel free to stop and ask questions. A lot of this is really a summary of what we have, where we are, and where we think we'd like to go. So with that, we're going to start with the background. So the background, really, this policy, again, was implemented in 2014, and it was designed to help us address how fee waivers and marketing agreements and co-sponsorships and things like that would be tackled. It established our original set of criteria on how we would waive fees, when we would do that, and then who's eligible for those. It also set out a set of parameters that must be met by the recipient. However, it did lack guidance on how to ensure the accountability and a system of check and balances. So really what that means is when we would waive something or something would be approved, there was no real follow-up. There was no kind of closure of that loop of did those expectations get met? Did your event go well? Did it bring the number of people that were promised? Did it meet the standards that were set forth by the town? Kind of that good faith process. So there was also minimal guidance on the limitations of the sponsorship scope. So if we had no guidance as to whether we were waiving small asks, big asks, what were the difference between them, when and how would we look at them, because quite frankly, no two events are the same. Each event comes on its own merits, and we look at them very, very individually. They all bring value in some way or form. So it's difficult to put a set of parameters that do that for everyone. As Grady mentioned, in 2016, it was brought to us that the town wanted to be more event-friendly. How do we attract more events to our community? How do we get them going so that they want to remain here in our community? What we were noticing is that a lot of folks came and used Fountain Hills as a stepping stone to establish an event, maybe work out the kinks of a first-time event, and then use that to move into a bigger community or a more established community that has maybe more residents or a bigger draw or a bigger, just a bigger venue, what have you. So what we developed was a system to help attract events here and help them stay here. We wanted to help first-time events get going, so there was the idea of a tiered system where the first-year event organizers could have up to 100% of their fees waived. Now, that doesn't mean that we would take on all of the cost of putting on the event, i.e. we would not go out and rent restrooms or fencing or do any of the hard costs, but we would potentially waive the cost of renting the park facilities or other things that permits and things like that. Year 2, again, helping them up with a fee waiver of up to 50%, and year 3 up to 25%, with the idea that by year 4, an established event should be able to develop a revenue stream and become self-sufficient. In addition to all of this, there is language within our policy that identifies co-sponsorships, and that co-sponsorships are identified that are part of our community. They partner with organizations that further our core programs, and they provide value, again, to our community beyond what we can do as staff and as a part of the community services department. Similar to the new special event system, that tiered system, the fee reductions and waivers were granted on a case-by-case basis. So perhaps you weren't a new event, perhaps you have had some long-term commitment to the community and consistently put on an event. You wouldn't be eligible for that new tiered system, but you could be eligible for a co-sponsorship partnership. Again, the difference being that tiered special event was supposed to be sunset. It's a taper system, right? It tapers off after that 3-year commitment, while a co-sponsorship has no expiration date, according to our current policy. Once it's identified as a co-sponsorship, the idea that can potentially live on in perpetuity, there is no expiration on that. All of this put together brings a set of challenges. And if you haven't already identified, fee waivers over time have increased. The idea that each year an event probably grows a little bigger, which is great, which is what we want. Oftentimes the scope of the events have grown, the footprint of the events have grown, but that comes with a significant value in that fee waiver. So what was originally waived in a partnership has grown can and does grow over time. It's often left unchecked because once again we have no close the loop system, as once we've identified, great, we're going to co-sponsor with you, off you go into the sunset, and we never kind of revisit that again. Many of the fee waivers have also increased as existing partners have grown or adopted new subgroups. So for instance, I'm going to use our Fountain Hills Civic and Cultural Association. The FHCCA is a great group. They do a lot for our community. However, a lot of other subgroups sort of fall under their umbrella. So they have they have a lot of extensions, whether that's the community garden or the art program or the greening of downtown, or I'm sure the list goes on. There's probably more than I can name. But again, as those partners increase, there's the idea that, well, they're still part of FHCCA, so therefore a lot of those partnerships are extended. And again, it happens sort of over time. It's not blatant, it's not intentional. It's just the way things have evolved. So the idea here is that we would like to look at some policy parameters to help curb the unintentional scope creep and allow both the town and the partner organizations to have those defined expectations so that nobody gets caught off guard, and that everybody understands, both ends of the bargain and how we're moving forward together. Additionally, our co-sponsorship, and I really want to emphasize this, they provide a lot of mutual benefit. So that's what I really want to make sure we understand, that they do a lot for us. But again, we have this expanding scope and no check and balance to ensure that everybody's getting and doing what they say they're going to do, that everybody's met the expectations out there. If you say you're going to put the town logo on all of your marketing materials, send a copy. We need a copy of the marketing materials to make sure that that happened. That's not a big ask, but it's an example of things that sometimes get forgotten about. Another area that we noticed, especially recently, is as leadership changes in our different civic groups and community partners. Leadership has changed in a lot of ways, and what was once sort of handshake agreements or things that had been done over a long period of time, they're not documented anywhere, and therefore we don't really have a way to fall back to understand what was approved, what was expected, what was contracted. So we need, we have a lack of documentation here. And that does present difficulties, because it's not just the organization that has turnover, the town staff have turnover as well. So if there's new staff that come on board, they really don't understand or have a way to review the history and how we evolved and how these agreements and things like that evolved. Lastly, there is some discrepancy in the language that's used in our agreements. You'll see the words sponsored, co-sponsored, town partnered, town sponsored, and they're used sort of interchangeably, but they actually do mean different things. One of the biggest discrepancies we have is when you say sponsorship. Well, does that mean you want financial sponsorship? Do you want funding? Are you asking the town for money? Are you asking the town for a fee waiver, which is not necessarily financial transaction? We're not but we are waiving costs. Often we, as staff who put on events, seek sponsorships from the community members, to support Turkey Trot or our movie in the park or other things that we do. So sponsorships is a very broad term. So we do need to kind of clean up some of the language so there's consistency in that as well. Grady mentioned our legacy events. They were added in 2016. Again, this was really after a long conversation about some of our long-term events wanting assurances. They wanted assurances that their dates and their venues and that their commitments could be relied upon year in and year out. You can see here that the 4 legacy events that were identified at that time were the Fountain Festival, the Great Fair, Oktoberfest, and St. Patrick's Day. The idea being that the Great Fair wanted to make sure they knew they would always be on the last full weekend of February, that event, that date would never be given away to another event out from under them, so to speak. They also wanted to make sure that they always had the same format, that they always had the town's, the fee waivers granted by the town. So what we did in return is we wanted to make sure that we set the scope and we set the parameter, that if these are the dates, these are the dates, you don't get to change them. And then if you do, or if the event should change hands, or it should change format, or it should change in any significant way, then the legacy status would be considered paused, and it would be reviewed by staff to make sure that it still met the spirit of what this is. For instance, and I'll use Oktoberfest. The Oktoberfest is identified originally, it was organized by Fountain Events, Inc. Over time, that event was now taken over by the Chamber of Commerce. At that time, when that transition happened, we were able to meet, review that most of the elements were still being met in terms of the date, in terms of the location. And so the legacy status was maintained for that event after that review. What's happening here is we don't have necessarily a definition for what legacy events are and who qualifies for them. Should we be adding more to these? When do you reach legacy status? After how long? After what parameters? So the idea here was that instead of creating a new system and creating a new designation for legacy, perhaps we back away and take away legacy and just develop operating agreements with each of our partners. Okay, that sort of encompasses a lot of our external events. We have another set of agreements that we use with other partners and that specifically is our IGAs, intergovernmental agreements, and operating agreements. So diving in, the most referred to IGA is with Fountain Hills Unified School District. The town and the district have a long-standing partnership and operate under an IGA, which outlines the privileges and the responsibilities of each party. Well, this specific IGA was actually developed in 2007, so it's quite dated. And it really doesn't reflect the current needs or the current process that we actually apply year in and year out with the school district. We did a small amendment to it earlier in 2020, I believe, that changed a few things, but it does identify and speak to a number of programs that don't happen anymore, a number of facilities that are not in use anymore. It still references basketball courts that have now long since been turned into pickleball courts. So it is a bit out of date. Operating agreements are sort of, I kind of look at them as a sister agreement to an intergovernmental. Operating agreements we often use with non-government agencies that want the support of the town for their programs. Specifically, one great example is our Boys and Girls Club. We have an operating agreement with them to use our facilities, specifically our parks, to run their flag football program and their basketball program. We partner with them on other things if they have events and things like that as well, but those are the two most popular things they do. However, kind of in the same vein, many of our operating agreements are out of date, are invalid, or just don't exist. We operate more out of good faith in a lot of ways than we do with actual documentation. A good example of that would be our Fountain Hills Soccer and our Fountain Hills Little League. They are two primary candidates that would be perfect for operating agreements, mostly because we've worked with them for quite a long time. They use our parks for their programs, which is great. We have no problem with that. And they do a lot for our youth. However, there's nothing in writing that says what they'll get, what they will provide, what we will provide, and making sure, again, that everybody's sort of on the same page. Much to what I just mentioned, they have turnover each year. They have a different president, different vice president. As kids kind of age out of their programs, new leadership comes in because it's all volunteer-based. And they don't always have the historical knowledge to know, well, the town usually does this, or no, the town doesn't do that, or we need to make sure that we, line our own fields for practices and things like that. And it's just sort of accepted things that probably need to be documented. The last piece of this policy has guidance on naming rights.
Rachel, if I could just stop you there. So
Yes.
as you can see, this is like a very convoluted policy, and we're going to get there. I just want to let you know that, tonight at the end of this presentation, you're going to see that in addition to maybe addressing and getting some guidance on things like fee waivers and when that's appropriate and all that, we're also wanting to basically come back at a later date with 3 separate policies, because they really, it's hard. You're reading the document and it's all over the place on where you're trying to find the naming rights, where you're trying to find the sponsorship, where you're trying to find the fee waivers. And so we really think that it would make more sense, even though some of them are interrelated, to have them as separate policies.
Yes.
I'll let Rachel go into the naming rights, which is also another, I think they had a different intent. I think this was probably the original part that existed, and then all these other things got added to the same policy.
Yes, I think you're right. And to your point, yes, that is actually our very first, after this naming rights concept, we'll move into what the staff recommendations are. And the very first one is to break these out into separate policies. Naming rights is really sort of guidance on, who and when and how facilities might be renamed, whether that be an honorary naming, whether that be a posthumous naming. Recent examples of this are both the Sharon Morgan and Wally Nichols plazas that were recently dedicated over the last 2 years. Now, we also, as part of this policy, tackle corporate and facility naming, which is usually done when there's a financial contribution that merits naming privileges. Oftentimes you'll see ball fields named after someone specific or a company or someone of that nature. Right now, we have a number of things that are named, but there are several questions regarding the longevity of this privilege and how renaming might be approached. State Farm Stadium is the example we often use. State Farm Stadium was not State Farm Stadium originally. Anybody remember what it was before State Farm Stadium? What was it? Yeah, University of Phoenix, yes. And there was the Bob, yes, that was the Bank One Ballpark, which is Chase Field, which is, I don't know what it is today. But again, it's not inconsistent to have that turnover after a certain period of time, because again, that financial contribution does have a lifespan. Lastly, in our policy, we have a section regarding street renaming and dedications, and that has been a topic of interest recently. Because while we do identify it as an option that we can do, it brings a set of hurdles logistically, specifically with the post office and how to change addresses. If you go from it being Shea Boulevard to, Fountain Hills Way, you change every business's address, you change the delivery process, and it has a lot of hurdles involved with it. So there may be some consideration there on how to move forward with those if we are ever to do street renaming in the future.
Yeah, Rachel, I don't have any problem with Sharon Morgan, Wally Nichols plazas, and so on. But I think we really have to have some criteria that are non-political. I don't know how you do that. It's not easy. But just because somebody's done a good job doesn't necessarily mean they get a street named after them. I mean, we have, I don't know how many members of, how many citizens are named, what's the Hall of Fame? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we got, I don't know how many people are in the Hall of Fame. How do you go about selecting for something as honorific as this? So just a thought.
Well, and just to let you know, there is some limited criteria. It's certainly, if this is going to be amended, it can certainly add more. But right now, there's criteria that talks about their contributions to the town. It doesn't necessarily mean it's political, and it doesn't mean financial either. It just means the things that they've done that deserve recognition. So, I mean, I think when we come back, what I'm saying is that when we come back with the naming rights policy as a separate policy, it would make sense to come up with additional criteria. But you'll recall every time we've done this, we've always, because the criteria is very limited, we've always brought it back to council. Council will always have the final say as to whether they think it's appropriate or not. Now, that's can get a little messy if there's some people that don't agree with who somebody is going to have a facility or a street named after them. But I think the criteria as being as objective as possible will make it easier on the council to make it very clear whether this is worthy or not based on the criteria.
No matter what we do, it's going to be messy, but
Yes.
I just find myself wondering if you couldn't have the FHCCA involved or a small committee of people. And we don't have to accept it, but at least let them look at the criteria and say, these people meet the criteria in our view, and let the council take it from there. Just an idea.
Now, and the other thing is that when it comes to someone that's passed away, I don't know if we have this already, but a lot of other places require a certain amount of time to go by.
Yes.
So that's not, just a quick emotional.
So the policy currently is 2 years,
Okay.
if you read it. But as you recall, each time we brought this before council, the council, by just their very action, has overridden the 2-year requirement. So Sharon was living, absolutely. And Wally, I don't believe he was gone quite 2 years when that was dedicated in his honor.
Yes. And we do have some criteria in here. And to your point, Mary, yes, there probably needs to have some sort of timeline involved as to when those types of decisions can be made, whether it's posthumous or not. And to that point, we've dedicated 2 plazas recently, and one was while Sharon was still with us, and one was after Wally had passed away. So we've kind of gone down both paths and sort of learned a few lessons in the process.
And Rachel, it's funny because I was having a conversation with the mayor, and I seem to remember there was 2 years. Again, the policy, it was not where I would have expected to find it, and so it was very difficult to find it. But again, I think that 2 years is to provide guidance so that sometimes there's not a knee-jerk reaction, but at the same time, council's the final decision maker on this. And it also talks about, before it comes back to council, it should be coming from, I believe it's 2 council members and the manager, that they bring it or they request and it comes before the council. So I think that it's just further refining what we've got. I think we've got a really good base to work from, but I think it needs some revisions. And then are you going to talk about some of the other changes that we were talking about, like designated like streets?
So that is one, and we do have some guidelines on streets in here, and I'm kind of reviewing them now, that no street shall be renamed unless there are no or very few buildings or other addressed facilities presently along the street. Well, I don't know how many streets we have here in town that don't have very many. And what is very many, again, if it's your business that's having an address changed and it impacts you, I'm sure you probably feel differently about that.
So Rachel, the vice mayor has brought to our attention that in other parts of the country, and I've seen this in other, even maybe parts of the valley as well, that you might see streets or plazas that have designations and you're not changing a complete street address or changing the name of a street, but you may call something way or historic, what have you. And so it's something we have never really contemplated, but it does make things a lot less complicated, because when you go through a renaming of a street, we have to work with the U.S. Postal Service. We have to make sure that all the folks that are on that street or businesses all understand that. So this is another alternative that I think is very attractive, because it makes it much more easier to implement.
Correct. The idea of doing an honorary naming versus a formal technical change may be an option for us, and that's something that we're exploring of how other communities do that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This came to light, and I was taken aback by how many hoops the town goes through when it does these things, notifying the post office, telling residents that their address is going to change. This came to light when I had reached out to Grady and the mayor that I was interested in looking for Dr. C.T. Wright to have the street that he lived on named after him, which is Dull Knife. And Grady went and everything through all of the changes. And I think it would behoove the council to look at this as something that wouldn't be in Chicago. An alderman makes a motion to other council members. He gets someone to sign on to the motion, and it's voted on, and then the mayor signs off on it, and it's an honorary way. Of course, they're never going to change Lakeshore Drive. They're not going to change Michigan Avenue, but parts of Michigan Avenue are named after people in an honorary way. And I feel that if staff could come up with something like that, and as far as the time limit goes, I mean, if it's someone's not adding to their resume when they're deceased. So if they're dead, they're not going to get more accolades the longer they're dead. So I think the time frame, whatever. But I just think that it's something that, recently Mike Archambault passed away, and huge to the community and everything that he's done in that. And I just think it would be easier if we would come up with something that's a little more flexible, things that don't take so much effort involving a post office and residents and everything. Mm-hmm. And also, if there's a fee, the person that makes the sponsorship should be willing to pay for the fee, whatever it would be to make the sign and everything, and then have the town come. So that's how this all started. I don't think it's political. I think that regardless of what party you're with or whatever, if you make a significant contribution to the town of Fountain Hills when you were living, in your actions and your deeds, I think you should be respected by having that honor.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification and the examples of well-known streets there. That's exactly what we've been struggling with here, so I appreciate that. So that brings us, that brings us to the last couple of slides, which are our staff recommendations. And this is where I'm hoping to kind of share some of our thoughts, and then really get the thoughts of our council so that we can integrate your preferences into this as well, so that we come up with a policy that is suited for where we are today. A lot of this will be review for what we covered. We do want to divide the current policy into 3 separate ones, so that it's easier for staff to implement and better public understanding. Consider additional language to establish more accountability for our organizers and our community partners, again, so that it's not a one and done and then we don't see our organizers or our partners for years or for however long. We have some way to close that loop. Again, we want to develop some consistent language so that when you say co-sponsorship, we all understand what that means. We'd like to consider fee options and a waiver process that ensures fairness and continuity. This is one of our big ones here from the staff perspective. Having a formula or a policy that is consistent, that doesn't have a if this, then that sort of process. A lot of ours, we love our community partners, and again, not all events are the same, so it's very difficult to set up a system that fits everyone. However, the closer we can get to that, the easier it is to apply across the board, so that there's no questions as to, well, last time we did this and this time we're going to do that, or this event had this and now that event wants this. We want to have that consistency. Consideration for how and when the process can be administered at the staff level versus when council input and action may be warranted. Again, this all stemmed from a question from our vice mayor about fee waivers and about how much was being waived, and there was quite a bit pulled together, quite a bit of information pulled as to what that number looks like and how that's being done. And so the question is the council comfortable with a system of doing that administratively? Would you guys like to see that in front of you? And how would you like to see that done? Lastly, the last recommendations here are identify a cost recovery model for programs that ensure, again, a viability and fairness for all partners and for all parties. Again, that's kind of referring to that tiered system. Is that something we like? Do we want to keep that in place to help new events get established? The next one would be to remove the legacy events and move all organizers into individual agreements. Update the existing IGAs and operating agreements and begin to establish consistent agreements. We would use part of the reservation policy that was brought forward a couple of weeks ago. That's under community services. That's kind of the policy we talked about of how we rent out our facilities, making sure that there's agreements in there. So we would make sure that the same language and terms were consistent. And then develop a comprehensive naming rights policy that explores new formats, as mentioned by our vice mayor, and options, as well as update existing procedures. What have I missed? What can I answer? What additions would you like to see?
Thank you so much. So do you mind if I know we have a speaker card on this, so can we just have Liz read that first and then we can discuss? Thanks.
Okay, we've received one speaker card from Betsy Lavoie with the Chamber of Commerce. And she states, prior to making an informed decision regarding legacy events within Fountain Hills, the Fountain Hills Chamber would like the opportunity to present the full economic impact for our town, the businesses, and the local nonprofits, as well as the history of events we host, which are currently legacy events. As the President CEO of the Fountain Hills Chamber, I would like to provide a full report in order to supply the town staff and the town council with all necessary information to make an informed decision if needed regarding fees applied to events within our town.
Thank you. Okay, so do you want to start a discussion? Mike?
Just quickly, logistics, I guess, question more than anything. You're talking about maybe formulating some new operating agreements with different groups. I mean, are you talking all of them or just the bigger ones? Or, like Noon Kiwanis, for example, my club, okay, we have the blood drives, breakfast with Santa, they're all at the community center. All the fees are waived. So I mean, is it something like that you're looking at, or bigger ones? That's,
I don't believe, for instance, I would say that those are what I would call, I'm sorry for the vernacular, because we've gone with town-sponsored and co-sponsored. I would say that those are co-sponsored because we're also having other components of our own events for that. So I would not go through the trouble of having an operating agreement with the Kiwanis for something like that. But I would probably, as an example, the Little League and soccer, those are great examples. Right now, they're getting the fields for no charge, and I think what we can have in the operating agreements that quid pro quo for in exchange for them doing maybe a few work weekends or you know, doing field preparation, then the town is agreeing to perhaps let you have it at either no or low cost. I think the chamber is a perfect example that maybe we have a master operating agreement on certain types of events. You know, like I don't see, and I'm sorry, Rachel, for jumping in, but for instance, the Stroll in the Glow, I don't see that as I think that's a partnership or co-sponsorship, because we have elements of our own thing going on with that, and we have our lighting ceremony. So it's all really one big event, but really they're the ones that have they're the backbone to that event, and we add components to it. So that's an example of one I wouldn't do, but maybe I would for the fairs. We'd have an operating agreement for the fairs. If the council, that's something the council wants to do. So that's what we're trying to gauge you tonight. But for small things, where we may do like a fee waiver, then that's where we'll probably end up doing an operating agreement, right?
And to your question, Councilman, part of that is, you know, if the day comes when you're not part of the club and I'm not here and there's new staff here, that's where having something in writing, whether it may not need to be as formal as an operating agreement, but having something that we develop, and maybe this is where our attorney can help us draft something small that says, hey, look, these are what we do in partnership with Noon Kiwanis. Here we do the blood drives, we do breakfast with Santa. These are the traditional dates. I don't know if those are predetermined. I know breakfast is, but I'm not sure about the blood drives. And things like that, because again, those things come at us sometimes when we have new staff and they aren't aware of what's traditionally done. Do we provide tables and chairs? Oh, okay. We need to, you know, and it's just, sometimes it's that detail level that having some sort of documentation certainly helps so that there's no questions as to how we got there.
yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and that's why I brought it up, because, I mean, if you know, smaller events or clubs need to do something like that, I think it should be done, because you're right, you talked about in your presentation about, you know, annual changes in leadership among clubs and organizations, et cetera, staff changes. So, you know, I remember when we first looked into the blood drives, and, you know, Reno Getty was the man at the time, and he kind of was a hard ass about it, because he's like, well, you know, you got to say it's a community blood drive. It's not just Kiwanis, because we're giving, you know, and I drafted up a page-long document saying we agree to add the town logo, et cetera. So I think it is good that stuff is documented, because, you know, then someone can look it up and say, yeah, that here's what the details are. So totally
But
agree.
on some of these simple things like that, we may not really have, it may just be a really, I wouldn't call it an operating agreement, it'd probably be a co-sponsorship agreement or something, because that's in the community's interest, you know,
Yeah.
for the town to be, you know, sponsoring blood drives, for instance.
Yeah, because, I mean, you know, we don't want to burden staff with having to draft 100 different operating agreements either, so.
Correct.
So I'm sure you're going to differentiate all that, and as far as the bigger picture and the fee waivers that we have been doing, and maybe you're going to change the procedure a little bit, but you know, looking at the list, I mean, I don't really have a problem with what we've been doing on a larger scale, so just for some input from me.
I have a question, please. As far as fee waivers, is there a certain criteria that you look at? Because it looks like with Little League, you charge them nothing. You don't even charge them a permit. Is the fee the same as a permit, or are they two different things? Or, because I would think that when you have people use our facilities, and it's quite expensive to do that on the fields and stuff, that they should have some skin in the game, so to speak, and have to pay some type of a fee. May not the full fee, maybe 20% or something, but I just think that it would benefit the town because of all that goes into keeping up those fields, et cetera. I think that the town might want to consider getting some type of a fee out of them.
So if I can jump in and then you can fill this out. So our council for a long time has identified like youth and trying to do things for families, trying to keep it affordable for families. And so things like youth sports, we don't want to be a hindrance to that. So like when we were going through like our fee recovery for our user fees, if you recall, family type programs, events, and also for seniors, we heavily subsidize those. But to your point, you're absolutely right. We are not collecting any fees. And so that's where I think an operating agreement comes in handy, where we can say, okay, Little League, you want these for free, we understand that, but in exchange for this, you're gonna do X, or you're gonna do this, so that it basically passes the, you know, the community standards that they're just not getting something for nothing. And because part of the concern we have is if we charge, and it might be more, maybe not quite the market rate, it could actually make it could pose a burden on the families that are registering their kids for the sports. And we really want to be as family friendly as a community. We already have a reputation. We're a retirement community. So we're doing everything we can to try to get over that kind of image. So this has been a big goal of the town for a number of years.
Another thing you might want to look at, because you had mentioned the Boys and Girls Club, and I remember way back, so we used to do youth basketball ourselves, and we did other programs so if you look at Little League as maybe doing something that a town might do anyway, or I know we had the conversation about the theater, so some towns will have, you know, a children's theater or something. So to me, you're looking at two things. You're looking at, would it be, and it was in one of your slides, would it be a function of a town that maybe was bigger or had more staff, whereas we'd be taking over the whole thing, but basically they're doing it, but it's something we would like to do. So that kind of look at the Little League like that. The other part, when you go to talking about the chamber and the fair, is is there a literal amount? So we're not saying, oh, there's probably people eating dinner or spending the night. Something like the chamber's fairs literally supply 500 business licenses or something, or even more, because it's not always the same at each fair. So you're like looking at actual money being brought into the town, not even just trying to imagine what it is because of sales tax and that kind of thing. So I think when you say something about an operating agreement, I see that, I see the chamber as being maybe one of the organizations that we would do it with, but not maybe in the way you're thinking. I'm thinking that they have a list of things that they do, including the Stroll in the Globe, but the Thanksgiving Day Parade and the Community Expo and the State of the Town and that kind of stuff. Those are events that they do that they don't make money on or anything like that. But if you just take those fairs, you know, the complimentary booths for the clubs that are actually making money on them, they give away a lot of complimentary booths. We've got the Key Club, and there's a lot of actual cash, basically, that we get and the town gets from events like that. So as we go forward, if there's another event that, you know, you literally see fees coming in, then, you know, are you going to want to start charging them then for, you know, whatever they're using, the Avenue Fountains or whatever it might be. So that to me should be part of the criteria. What are they bringing in, like, literally, and is it a function that a town might actually do themselves? But then taking it further, if there is an event that there's some question about, then I think that you should bring it to the council and not have to make that on your own. But I think a lot of these things, you could make those decisions on your own.
In fact, we have done that on occasion. In fact, that's why this policy was revised in 16, because there was a farm-to-table event, I think that we're wanting to do, and the staff recommendation was against it, I believe.
I believe the council has a responsibility to give you the tools that you need to be successful. And I think part of those tools is a strict guideline for how these events are planned and how they go off. I was quite alarmed by the number of $204,000 in waived fees. That's a lot of money. I believe, and this is no slight at all for the town manager who waives these fees, but I believe that when, I took quite a tongue lashing from Sharon Morgan when I had brought this up back in 2018, 19. And I believe that if we sat down with the chamber and talked to them, they use infrastructure when they're here, and when they have the fairs, inevitably, we have cars driving all over our roads and everything. So there's an infrastructure use. For there to be no charge whatsoever, I think is not right. Also, I believe that all of the people that have been piggybacking on the meeting rooms, I wouldn't think that it would be out of line for, there to be a limit on how many times you can have a meeting. If it's quarterly, 4 times a year, if your club or whatever organization wants to meet more than 4 times a year, they should pay. I just don't believe that there should just be this ever-flowing well of things that the town gives away. It's very hard for us as elected officials to keep giving stuff away and then go to the residents and cry poor and say we need money. We're leaving money on the table. I was shocked to find out that the concession stand, when we had senior softball events and that, the concession stand isn't open. And when I asked why the concession stand wasn't open and being run, well, it's the Little League. It's our building. I have nothing against Little League, so don't send me emails. I played T-ball all the way to high school. I just wasn't good enough to go any farther. But my parents paid through the wazoo for me to have the privilege to play Little League. And part of the reduction was running the concession stand by parents who made money for the use of the fields and all that. So I think we're squandering the ability to use the concession stand for other events, other ball fields, when people rent that. I don't think that the Little League should have jurisdiction over that. If they want to run it when their kids are there, that's fine. But if we wanted to run it with our volunteers in town, when we have events going on there, that's a money-making source. So I think we need to look into that.
Vice Mayor, that you just mentioned something that I absolutely think would be in an operating agreement, that would spell out things like the facilities and what they can use, and that it's not exclusive use, because you're absolutely right. There's no reason why other groups couldn't. I understand that they've invested in some of the things in that concession stand, but again, they're not paying the town for the use of the facilities and all that. So why couldn't that be in an operating agreement with an understanding that when we have other events there, that the concession stands can be used?
Absolutely.
If they don't want their equipment used, then we have to come up with some other alternative. But
Right, and this is not, there's no council member, I mean, I'm not speaking for him, but no one hates Little League, no one hates kids, I mean, of course we want kids, to play, but let's be fair about it. I just don't think that we should focus more on just making things fair and equitable. And I think that when I was running for office, so many people were like, oh, it's the old boy network down there. You pick up the phone, if so-and-so knows so-and-so, you get this free, I just don't think it should be that way. If I wanted to rent something, I would never think about going to the mayor or going to Grady and asking them to waive a fee for me because I'm a council member. That's shady. You shouldn't do that. You should pay for what you get. So I'm adamant on that. And to relieve, I'll ask Grady this, but I think to relieve there being him in a position where he has to make these decisions, if someone wants to waive a fee over $5,000, I believe it should come to the council. We're not that busy. We can, if someone comes and wants to run something and it's over $5,000, I think that fee waiver should be brought in front of the council. We are in charge of taxpayers' money, And we should be able to tell them, yeah, we think that's a good waiver, or that's not a good waiver. I just don't think that it should be on Grady's shoulders, or the next town manager, or the town manager after that. I believe that we should have some kind of policy where if it's a certain amount of money, 5, 6, 7,000, it comes in front of us. I'm also not anti-chamber. Me and only 2 other council members voted for the art fair, or expressed wanting to have the art fair. So I'm not against the Chamber of Commerce, but the Chamber of Commerce makes very good money off of this. And to give the town some of its fees, I don't think is asking too much. We're not being greedy. So I'm done with my rant.
One thing I want to say about the chamber is, yes, they probably make a lot of money. I've never actually seen the bottom dollar value, but this is one of the least expensive chambers of commerce that I've ever been a part of. Part of the reason why they keep their fees so low is because of things like the art fair. So I actually do benefit from the art fair. Mike benefits as a chamber member from the art fair. And I know Betsy's going to have a billion other numbers to be able to share, but I do want to actually say that does actually come back to the business owners that are chamber members.
I agree with you, council member. And, I also think that, when we say, well, the chamber brings in, X amount of dollars in restaurants and everything, well, I'll go to the concourse. The concourse brings in 22,000 people. We charge Peter Volney to rent that. And the argument that people came up to me later on and said, well, his money goes to the Children's Children's Hospital, and it doesn't benefit Fountain Hills. That's the most stupidest statement I've ever heard. Why? Because children in Fountain Hills go to that hospital and benefit from that hospital. So to say that residents or children don't benefit from that, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument. So I believe that, yes, the chamber gives a lot of things. I don't think by the chamber, let's just say if it's $11,000 to close it on the weekend, if the chamber was to pay half of that $11,000, is it going to hurt Mike or Sharon or anybody else? Let them come forward and tell us what they make. If they want to come forward and tell us what they make, I've been told it's a very large number. I honestly don't believe $5,000, $5,500, $6,000 in fee is going to break the chamber. It's going to affect their bottom line, and it's going to hurt any chamber business members.
Thank you. I want to mention about the chamber fairs because it's beyond, they do beyond what you just mentioned. First of all, I think if you're a capitalist, you don't really care how much money they make on something. I think that these fairs are what keep them afloat, and I think it's kind of moot what they make on it. If they have 750 artists, and let's just take that to 500 times our business licenses. It's $37,000, more than $37,000. What they would owe us is $21,000 to use the 6 days of the Avenue of the Fountains. At least this is from 2018 and 19. So they've already paid for that. I guess I don't understand that trying to equate what they do. There's 13 complimentary booths that they give to, including to the town, and a lot of other entities. So that's $13,000 that they're not collecting. They pay the Four Peaks Rotary $10,000 for trash removal. They have the Key Club that makes $1,800 to clean tables. There's a lot of things like that that are just connected with that particular event. Then you've got all these other things that I mentioned that they do that don't make money. Stroll in the Glow, Thanksgiving Day Parade, Community Expo, State of the Town, that shows them to be a partner with the town. So, and the thing about bringing it back to council is going to start those conversations about trying to compare the worth of one group over another, and that doesn't really get you anywhere sometimes. And so that's why I said, I think that the staff continuing to make decisions the way they have with criteria and with what some of the things we're talking about tonight would be a good way to go. And last, to use that spreadsheet that we got, and the $200,000, I mean, that really includes a lot of these IGAs and such. So I don't think we should necessarily be adding those as if we just gave a blank check or said, okay, you can use it for free. I mean, if you've got, and granted, we are going to look at some of those IGAs to see if they've become a little less even over the years, but I don't think that this is a clear picture to say we're not taking care of taxpayer money. Some of this, I think, everything is debatable, but I think that is not a clear picture to say we give away $200,000 worth of using our facilities. Yes?
I don't have a position one way or the other yet about the chamber, but Mayor, you said I think you said something like they make most of their money from the fairs.
I think so. That's what they said when they wanted to have the fairs.
Okay. But over the years, this may not be accurate, I've heard that they won't release their budget. Grady, have you ever seen the chamber's budget?
No, but they are a private organization, so they don't have the same disclosure requirements that government has. So
that may be, but if they're
not like a 501c3 that has to report, to others.
If we're subsidizing them, then it seems to me that that's a strong argument for at least seeing their budget, because we're only looking at one side of the equation. I just feel pretty strongly we ought to see where the money is. I mean, they just refurbished a building, put an addition on it. I'd like to know how much they're getting, for example, from the fairs, and what they're getting, and what other revenues they're getting, so we can make a fair judgment.
To piggyback off that, Mayor, the Thunderbird Artist, that's a fee that's waived. I mean, are they giving the Kiwanis Club and all of these free things to? I'd be interested. I mean,
So my understanding is Thunderbird is, and actually when we started invoking the new fee schedule or the fees, we had a lot of pressure to not do that and to go ahead and allow it. They in turn don't charge our residents. They do charge a gate fee, but if you show that you're a resident of town, they will not charge you to do the, what do they call their event? The wine and something affair?
Yeah, the
Wine and Art Affair,
I believe.
So I hear what you're saying, and you're absolutely right, that they do have a fee waiver.
yeah, I mean, if we as a council, and let me preface this, I didn't say that, I didn't mean to say, or if you said that I think that this is a waste of taxpayers' money, I didn't. I said that the taxpayers are owed an explanation of why we do things. It shouldn't be just because we said so. So if you look at this list, if anybody looks at this list and doesn't find their ways of looking at each one of these and saying, maybe that's too much, or maybe we should do something different, it's beyond me. I mean, if you think everything's perfect on that list, then I don't know what we have to discuss.
No, I agree with you, and I said that I think they are also debatable. I think we were talking more about the fair. And I guess I really don't understand, or I don't agree that what they make on it or don't make, or what their bank account is, matters. That's not how we make these decisions. Is it something for the town? Is it something the town wants? We want visitors. We've been, so does it further our goals? Do we actually make money on it? Yes, we do. On the fairs, we certainly do, and with all of the other events that they do for us. But yeah, I think any one of these, you have a perfect right to look through all of them and try to figure that out on whether you think that they're worth it or not. But I'm just having a hard time trying to figure out why, if they make money on something, why that matters. Yes, sir.
Taking that a step further, I agree with Alan. We don't know, we can't make an intelligent decision on this without numbers. And if we want visitors and people coming to the town, then we should be waiving the fee to Peter Volney for the Concourse Car Show. I mean, if you're going to do it for one, you've got to do it for all, and you've got to be consistent. And maybe they're different organizations, but we just don't know. And they are shutting, the chamber is shutting the town down, basically, for 3 days, twice a year. Or maybe it's 4 days, I don't know. But there's got to be some value to that. And again, I can't make that judgment without knowing any numbers either, and I don't think any of us can.
Well, if I may, I think that the hour's getting late. I think we've had some really good direction from a policy standpoint on at least the naming rights and sponsorships, and I think we'll come back with the policies very soon on that. We obviously have heard some ideas on what to do on fee waivers and how to approach fee waivers. I'm not saying that we've got consensus. I think we're going to probably need to further refine and discuss that, because I'm hearing like there might be 3 different ideas. So I don't think we have real clear consensus on that. I do hear that there's some fairness and equity questions that maybe we should have criteria. I think we're trying to deal with operating agreements on those that have currently not been paying, but actually provide some sort of public benefit to the community. There are some out there that are questionable that I'm hearing that we need to maybe address it in a different way. So if I've kind of satisfactorily addressed what I think I've heard tonight, that's how we'll approach going forward. I don't think that the fee waiver thing is really done based on the discussion we've heard tonight.
Just to talk about fairness, if you're going to look at how much somebody's bottom line is, then we need to do it for everyone. So do you want to look at all these other organizations and ask for their balance books and that kind of thing? Because I think we make a decision not based on whether they need the money. We're making it on how, is it something we want, and what are they contributing to the town, and is it something that the town would have done on its own, not the bottom line of the organization that's trying to have an event. Sharon?
This is a very subjective matter. I think if we did everything we could to make it less subjective, David can tell us how many business licenses we get out of the fair. We can figure out how much money that is. We can find out if the hotels are filled. There are things we can do for the fair and for Concourse in the Hills and all the other stuff to get a general idea of the income. I know not every business files their TPT every month. Some people do it once a year or however often, so that's going to be a little harder to determine. But there are going to be some pretty objective numbers that we can pinpoint for all the various events that we have questions about.
So do you want us to do the motion as far as separating the policies, or do you just know?
Actually, I don't think they're really, I think it is set up for motion, but we weren't looking for an action tonight. I think we've got clear direction on where to go.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Council direction to the town manager? A motion to adjourn? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.